Chapter 940. Even so, the fourth prince still threatened him with a sentence. Mr. Sun, aren't you afraid that I will punish you or even kill you for saying this in front of me? As soon as he finished speaking, the fourth prince's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent, and the scimitar at his waist was already unsheathed. Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? Although this old man is 46 this year, I haven't lived long enough. Sun Wen was calm and composed. He looked at Prince Roland with a faint smile, his eyes shining with wisdom and confidence. His eyes clearly conveyed a message: he was not afraid. He was not afraid of the threat of death from Prince Roland. He did not even think that Prince Roland would really punish him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. The fourth prince gasped for breath, with beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. He raised his hand and sheathed his scimitar. Forget it. If Mr. Sun has anything to say, just say it. I will listen. After saying that, he sat back down unwillingly. How could the fourth prince be a match for Sun Wen when it came to scheming? In terms of mental fortitude, Sun Wen had attained the transcendent realm of being able to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him. In the end, Sun Wen won, completely dispelling the fourth prince's suspicions. Sun Wen said with a smile, "The 3 cities of Shangyu County are tasteless, but it's not a pity to abandon them. It's better to make good use of them. If we use it as bait, we can injure Lu Shi and prevent her from sending troops to threaten the northern borderline for a year or 2. At the same time, we can also help His Highness get rid of his greatest threat." The fourth prince's eyes flashed fiercely as he said, "My mortal enemy?" Sun Wen said, "The northern borderline has always been particular about choosing talents. Regardless of one's background, the fourth prince is naturally qualified to ascend to the throne. According to the inheritance system of the Han family, even if all his brothers died, the fourth prince would not have the right to inherit the throne. Who asked his mother to be a female slave for others to play with? However, the customs of Beijiang were different from those of the Central Plains. There were no rules in the northern borderline. Whichever child was stronger could inherit more property. Even if Prince Roland was just the son of a slave girl, he was still qualified to inherit the throne as long as he was strong enough. Sun Wen's short sentence quickly and accurately poked the fourth prince's weak spot. Prince Roland's hand that was holding the machete trembled, and even his breathing stopped suspiciously. Of course, he knew that he was qualified, but being qualified did not mean that he had hope. His mother's clan was too weak and barren. His starting point was the lowest among his brothers. If he wanted to overthrow the 8 brothers around him and ascend the throne, he would have to overcome 5 trials and kill 6 generals. You think I have hope? The fourth prince's breathing quickened. Sun Wenning had laid out such an inescapable trap. If Sun Wenning helped him with all his might, it might not be impossible for him to inherit the throne. Where there's a will, there's a way. How would you know if you don't try? Sun Wen's expression was indifferent. He didn't show any joy or sorrow, as if he was detached from the world. Among the 9 princes, the second prince has the strongest army. If the fourth prince wants to lay his hands on the throne, he will be the first person you have to get rid of. The first prince was using self-defiling methods to protect himself, but he was also secretly accumulating power, so he had to be on guard. Wen had a plan, killing several birds with one stone. Using the 3 cities of Shangyu County in exchange for Lu Shi being unable to mobilize his troops and for the first and second princes to be crippled. Do you think it's worth it? If he said that to Jiang Pengji, she would probably have twisted his head off long ago. Do you know what it means to not give an inch of land? Even if the land was left to grow weeds or turned into a cesspool, others could not even think about getting a piece of it. Jiang Pengji had once used the muzzle of a gun to poke the forehead of a neighbor from the Federation in order to negotiate with him. The 7th Army Corps was one of the 3 main battle armies. She directly spoke to the messenger. Either he retracted his leg, or he started a war. Fortunately, the person Sun Wen was talking to was the fourth prince and not the cruel Jiang Pengji. The fourth prince's eyelids twitched violently, and his heart beat wildly. He was about the same age as the first and second princes. When he was young, he was bullied, humiliated, and bullied by the two. For the fourth prince, the two were like two mountains piled in front of him, so tall that it made him feel hopeless. At that moment, Sun Wen told him that he could get rid of the two of them and even prevent Lu Shi from mobilizing his troops. "Master, tell me quickly." The fourth prince clenched his fists nervously. Unknowingly, his emotions had been completely controlled by Sun Wen. "Your Highness, come closer." Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, and the fourth prince hurriedly leaned forward to listen. "Master Sun, please speak." Now is the end of the autumn grain harvest, and the grain is gradually being stored in the granary. The second prince is impatient and eager for quick success, but he is not good at management. In recent years, the price of grain in the north borderline has increased greatly. He keeps so many private soldiers under him, and the grain has long been unable to make ends meet. The fourth prince, why don't you privately create a map of the granary in Chongzhou and reveal it to the second prince? With the second prince's temperament, he will definitely keep it a secret and take all the benefits for himself. What was harvesting? The troops and horses were not given rations, and there was no logistical support. They completely relied on the soldiers to raise their own rations, plunder from the people, and be self-sufficient. The north borderline cavalry often harassed the people of Chongzhou, raided houses, and plundered rations. At first, when they found out that Jiang Pengji was in Chongzhou, they wanted to repeat the same trick. However, Jiang Pengji was too cunning. Every year, the location of the granary was different. The north borderline tried harvesting, but other than the first small victory, the troops who went to harvest almost starved to death in Chongzhou. After suffering a few losses, they knew that it was not easy to take advantage of Jiang Pengji. Harvesting was not very effective. Nowadays, the north borderline rarely organized large-scale cavalry to harvest. If the second prince wanted to take all the autumn grain for himself without anyone knowing, he definitely could not approach the border in the name of harvesting. Sun Wen continued, "In this way, to prevent the outside world from knowing, the second prince will definitely take the initiative to ask for permission to guard the 3 cities of Shanyu. The fourth prince will then play a small trick and send people disguised as Lu Shi's troops to kill a few of his personal guards. The second prince will blame this on Lu Shi. However, you must remember, you must not let your own personal guards disguise themselves. It is best to let the first prince's people do it. Even if the deed is exposed, others will only find out that it was the first prince who did it, and deliberately incite the second prince and Lu Shi to fight." The fourth prince nodded as he listened. Sun Wen continued, "Lu Shi has an explosive personality, and the second prince is obstinate and self-opinionated. If the two of them meet, it is impossible that they will not fight. However, no matter how many troops the second prince has, how long can he resist Lu Shi? The 3 cities of Shanyu County have not been repaired for many years. They will not be able to resist Lu Shi's powerful troops. If the second prince dies in battle, it will be fine, but if he doesn't, not only will he lose the private troops he has carefully raised, but he will also let the king see the number of troops he has and his ambition. As for the first prince, who deliberately provoked the war between the 2 sides, it will not be good either." As the fourth prince listened, he felt a chill in his heart, but at the same time, he could not suppress his excitement. Very quickly, he came back to his senses. "What about Lu Shi?" Sun Wen laughed. "The 3 cities of Shanyu are already in ruins. Lu Shi has to deal with the aftermath after conquering them. Isn't this a good way to divert his energy? Within a year or 2, how will he have the energy to start another war?" The fourth prince's eyes lit up. Yes, as long as the situation in the north borderline was peaceful for a year or 2. Master is indeed brilliant. Chapter 941. Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the northern borderline. He was full of conspiracies and tricks. Jiang Pengji was also ready for war. It was the autumn harvest. Everyone was so busy that their feet hardly touched the ground. When the autumn grain entered the warehouse, they felt more relaxed. This year's batch of autumn grain has entered the warehouse. Qiguan Rang presented a thick account book. Every grain collected was recorded in the book. Jiang Pengji flipped through it carefully. With this batch of grain, we have the confidence to fight a war. Is there any news from Zixiao? Qiguan Rang held his hands by his sides and said expressionlessly, "There's no news yet, but it should be soon." Jiang Pengji nodded and did not respond. Qiguan Rang endured for a while and had to take the initiative to speak. "My lord has never seen Sun Wen. How do you know that he's as capable as Lu Shang? You trust him so easily. If he covets the power of the northern borderline." Qiguan Rang did not finish his sentence, but he believed that Jiang Pengji knew what he meant. "We have to guard against him." Jiang Pengji said with a smile, "I don't know if Sun Wen is as capable as Lu Shang, but it's enough for Zixiao to know." Qiguan Rang showed an expression that said, "I knew it." He sighed and said, "My lord has grown up." A cabbage had grown up and finally knew how to feed a pig. Look at what you're saying. It's as if the cabbage you painstakingly raised has been fed by a pig. Jiang Pengji teased, "You're so jealous." Qiguan Rang secretly rolled his eyes and added in his heart, "Isn't it the other way around?" He trusted Wei Si's judgment because he trusted him. If not for some kind of honey filter, he believed that his lord would not be so rash. He frowned and said, "My lord, when did you have such thoughts?" After all, she was a female lord and was often criticized. If she could not maintain a clear relationship with her subordinates, her reputation might be tarnished. "When did it happen?" "I can't remember. But Wen Zheng, you can rest assured that Zixiao will not affect my ambitions." Qiguan Rang had been observing the surrounding situation as an outsider. He saw the situation more clearly than the people involved. "I'm not worried about my lord, but about Zixiao." Qiguan Rang frowned. Wei Si did not deliberately steal the limelight. He did not have a strong presence, but after thinking about what he had done, no one could say that he was not a pillar. Such a talent shouldn't be buried, nor should he be confined in a cage like a canary. If he didn't do that and allowed him to show off his talent, he would definitely die. Even if the Lord did not mind, would the other officials not have any thoughts about it? The most important thing for a faction was harmony and unity. "Does it really have to be him?" asked Qiguan Rang. "It has to be him. The more I get to know him, the more I feel that he's the one I want," Jiang Pengji said with certainty. "Ambitious men, who wants to be a canary? If he doesn't want to live an ignoble life, I'm afraid my lord won't bear to let him suffer." If his identity was revealed, Wei Si would have to stay away from the center of power. It wasn't that they didn't trust him, but it was for the sake of unity within the faction so that others wouldn't feel unbalanced or have negative emotions. If Jiang Pengji insisted on having her own way, she might harm her and Wei Si. Then, what does Wenjing think? Qiguan Rang said, "It's better to keep it a secret." Rang can pretend that he doesn't know anything. "Keep it a secret?" Jiang Pengji murmured repeatedly. "As long as it's the Lord's child, it will definitely be your blood. It doesn't matter who the father is." Qiguan Rang said, "You can say that you got pregnant because of feelings, or that you got married and had a child in your dream. As long as you have a child, you can keep the father's identity a secret. As long as others don't know who the father is, Zixiao can also continue to realize his ambitions and aspirations. But in this way, my lord and Zixiao will have to suffer." Jiang Pengji thought about it for a long time and laughed bitterly after a while. "Wenjing, you're thinking too far ahead. We'll have to face it sooner or later." Qiguan Rang took over the account book that Jiang Pengji had finished reviewing and said expressionlessly, "You should also pay attention to your emotions. What happens in private is none of my business. In daily life, you should at least control your emotions." Just like the previous time, she looked at Wei Si as if she wanted to skin him alive. It was always like that. Even the slow-witted generals could notice the clues. Qiguan Rang also reminded her in private to prevent his lord from doing something that she would regret for the rest of her life in the heat of youth. Wenjing, I'll think about it. Although she didn't want to admit it, Qiguan Rang's solution was considered the best of both worlds. It's still troubled times now. It's not suitable to think about these matters. We'd better get down to business. Jiang Pengji changed the topic stiffly. Qiguan Rang could only roll his eyes helplessly. As they were talking, Wei Ci was summoned from outside the tent. Greetings, my lord. Wei Ci first bowed, then nodded to Qiguan Rang, who was sitting next to Jiang Pengji. He took the initiative to sit on the other side. This is the tip-off I just received. The big fish has taken the bait. Wei Ci handed over the booklet with both hands. Jiang Pengji took it and glanced at it. This Sun Wen is truly capable. This trick within a trick is truly beautiful. The letter said that Sun Wen had secretly plotted and successfully made the second prince of the northern borderline volunteer to take the order to be stationed in the 3 cities of Shangyu. Chapter 942. The second prince rode a tall horse leisurely. This is Nanshan County of Shangyu County. It doesn't look like much. It's not as prosperous as a small tribe in the north borderline. The houses on both sides of the street were dilapidated, and there were almost no traces of merchants. I heard that Shangyu County was a good place in the past, where merchants and trade flourished. Things remain the same, but the people have changed. The second prince's advisor rode a step behind, looking around and sighing. Ha ha ha. It's just a small town at the border of the Central Plains. How prosperous can it be? The second prince laughed disdainfully. He brought 20,000 private troops to camp outside the city, while he brought 1,000 elites into the city. He spent all his fortune to train these 20,000 elites, and he loved them as if they were his eyes. In order to keep the benefits to himself, he gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and took out all his belongings. He volunteered to the king of the north borderline to take over the 3 cities of Shangyu. The original guards were sent elsewhere. The second prince sat down boldly. The official registrar of Nanshan County trembled in front of him, waiting for orders. Report how many soldiers are left in the city. The official registrar trembled and said, there are 6,700 guards in the city. The second prince turned his head and sneered at the advisor. There are only 6,700 people in Nanshan County. What can such a small number of guards do? Lu Shi of Chongzhou is also a good-for-nothing. I heard that the pedantic Confucian scholars of Dongqing always talk about taking back their territory. Nanshan County's defense is so weak, yet Lu Shi doesn't send troops to fight back. It seems that the cowards of Dongqing are just shouting slogans when they take back their territory. The advisor smiled and flattered the second prince, saying a lot of good things, making the second prince feel comfortable. The second prince was full of confidence and spoke with fervor. Although Lu Shi is a bit of a coward, she's a girl after all. It's normal that she's not as courageous as a man. Although there are only 6,700 guards in Nanshan County, every one of them is an elite of the north borderline. They can fight against 10 men on the battlefield. Lu Shi is flattered by the outside world, but she's still a timid girl. She won't amount to much. The advisor's smile was a little awkward, but he still catered to the second prince and praised him. Compared to the second prince's blind arrogance, the advisor was somewhat clear-headed. Apart from anything else, he could understand why Jiang Pengji had not mobilized her troops to recapture the 3 cities of Shangyu. First of all, fighting a war was not something that could be fought just because one wanted to. No matter how resentful the people of Dongqing were, the 3 cities of Shangyu had been ceded by Dongqing to the northern borderline. This was the territory of the northern borderline. If they rashly sent their troops back, it would mean that they would completely fall out with the northern borderline and officially declare war on the northern borderline. Secondly, fighting a war would consume too much energy, and the preparation would take a long time. If they were to start a war without any preparation, how was that any different from courting death? Thirdly, since the 3 cities of Shangyu had been ruined by the northern frontier, it would not make much difference whether they were recaptured 2 years earlier or 2 years later. He did not dare to say these words to the second prince, lest he spoil his mood. Your Highness is right. The second prince laughed heartily and said to his advisor, "You know me best." Overjoyed, the second prince feasted for 2 days and made friends with the local nobles. Although these nobles stayed in the 3 cities of Shangyu as if they had been exiled, they were local tyrants who had been operating for many years. The 3 cities of Shangyu could be considered as a buffer zone between the northern borderline and Dongqing. At the same time, it was also a lawless area where many smuggled goods were the most rampant. Most of these goods were war resources, and the profits were huge. Even the second prince could not help but be tempted by them. However, the happy time did not pass for long. An urgent message came to his ears. "Report." The loud and urgent voice of the messenger came from outside the room. The second prince was holding a wine bottle and drinking with someone. When he heard the voice, his dashing eyebrows knitted together in displeasure. "What happened? How dare you disturb my mood?" The messenger's breathing was rapid, and there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Your Highness, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of our soldiers outside Nanshan County, a total of 25 people." "What?" The strong smell of alcohol came out of his nostrils. The second prince slammed the wine bottle on the table, and a deafening bang was heard. The advisor beside him stopped smiling and asked the messenger before the second prince lost his temper. "Who killed them? How did the 25 people die?" The messenger told him everything in detail. Last night, during the handover of the patrol, a team of cavalry did not return. The next day, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of the missing people not far from their post. There were signs of a struggle near the corpses. When the advisor heard this, his heart skipped a beat. "Not good. Where are the corpses now?" "Outside the hall." "Bring them up." The second prince's chest surged with anger. He lifted his leg and flipped the wine table. "I want to see who dares to do this." The loud bang shocked the singers and dancers in the hall, and they did not dare to move. They trembled like quails. After a series of footsteps, the soldiers of the northern borderline carried the corpses into the hall. Other than the corpses, there were many clues found at the scene. The most important of them was a token. This token was none other than the token of a Chongzhou soldier. The weapons left behind and the words carved on the weapons all pointed to Chongzhou. After seeing this solid evidence, the second prince clenched his fists in anger and gritted his teeth. "Lu Shi, I haven't found trouble with her, and she's already stirring up trouble." The second prince's anger soared. The advisor beside him groaned. "Your Highness, we still need to investigate further. To conclude that Chongzhou's Lu Shi provoked us so hastily, what if it's not?" Before the advisor could finish, the second prince interrupted him. "What's so hasty about this? Besides Lu Shi, who else would do such a thing? Besides, even if Lu Shi didn't do it, so what? Sooner or later, I and Lu Shi will have to fight." The second prince volunteered to come to the 3 cities of Shangyu. He wanted to use the 3 cities as a springboard to sneak attack Jiang Pengji's granary. He wanted to rest for 2 days before making a move. Now that Chongzhou could not sit still and test them, how could the second prince tolerate it? The advisor was speechless. For some reason, he felt that this matter was unreliable. The second prince said, "Lu Shi killed 25 of my men. I will repay him tenfold." The advisor's eyelids twitched violently. He watched as the second prince sent someone to invite the soldiers to discuss military matters. "When I take over her granary, Lu Shi will have no more grain. Let's see how arrogant she can be then." According to the map, there were a total of 3 granaries. The second prince had already sent people to check these 3 places. Almost all of them had stored 2 million dong of military rations. What did this mean? 300,000 dong was enough for 100,000 soldiers to eat for more than a month. The grain that Lu Shi had accumulated over the years was enough for 100,000 soldiers to fight for 2 years. It was a pity that Lu Shi did not have a good eye for using people. He actually leaked the distribution map of such an important granary. Once she ran out of grain, she would be dead. The second prince looked in the direction of Chongzhou and gritted his teeth. If I can't transport the grain, I won't leave a single grain for you. Chapter 943. Jiang Pengji had planted informants in the 3 cities of Shangyu early in the morning. She received the news as soon as the second prince's army entered the city. Finally, there's a battle to fight. If I don't fight, the weapons in my hands are going to rust. When Fu Wang received the news, he didn't even have time to change his armor before hurrying to the main tent. Li Yun, who was passing by with him, saw this and laughed helplessly as he shook his head. These few years of training have really stifled General Fu. Fu Wang had a warlike gene in his bones, so he couldn't settle down at all. After training for a few years and living a comfortable life, he felt uncomfortable all over. Usually, he could only rely on a lot of exercise and training soldiers to vent his excess energy. Because the training was too heavy, Fu Wang's soldiers complained incessantly. If it wasn't for Jiang Pengji, who couldn't stand it anymore and lightened the training load of the troops, someone might have died. Fu Wang walked briskly and said as he walked, as a soldier, of course, we have to see blood often to maintain our sharpness. Why did he have to put on an act all day? No matter how well he acted, it was still fake. It's not that you didn't do a good job, it's just that you feel aggrieved. Fu Wang would often ask a few generals to spar with him. Other than Li Yun, who could exchange over 100 moves with him without being at a disadvantage, the others could not withstand his blows. Of course, the Wanzhou group had many generals who could fight, but people like Dian Yan and Meng Hun were not in Chongzhou. It was always Li Yun who was fighting. After a while, Fu Wang also felt bored. General Fu, if you really want to fight to your heart's content, why don't you just look for my lord? It would have been better if Li Yun had not mentioned it, but once he did, Fu Wang could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. If he fought with Li Yun, he had an 80% chance of winning, but if he fought with his lord, he basically had no chance of winning. He really didn't know what this woman ate growing up to be so good at fighting. When they arrived at the main tent, the strategists were already sitting in their seats. Jiang Pengji saw that everyone was present. She glanced at Qiguan Rang. He understood her intention and took out a declaration of war. The barbarians slandered us for launching a sneak attack. In order to retaliate, they sent several teams of cavalry to harass the innocent civilians at the border. They massacred the villages there, burned, killed, and looted. Such vile and provocative behavior cannot be tolerated. Jiang Pengji said, "Do you have any opinions?" Fengzhen said, "I believe that we should attack with a large force to show our military might." Wei Ci seconded. Fu Wang had long been looking forward to fighting, so of course he wouldn't disagree. He wanted nothing more than to raise his hands and feet high. Li Yun also knew that the upcoming battle was to prepare for the northern expedition next year. His blood was boiling, how could he not respond? Very well. Everyone in the tent was her confidant, so it was impossible for them to raise any objections. Jiang Pengji said to Qiguan Rang, "I'll have to trouble Wenjing to announce this declaration to the world, so that the world knows that it's not us who want to fight, it's the barbarians of the northern borderline who have gone too far." Qiguan Rang bowed to the end and said, "Yes." After going through the formalities, the next step was the crucial strategic deployment. The barbarians of the northern borderline have a set of fake maps of granaries. They are in Sangamo, Lijiang, and Chaowu. The person leading the troops was the second prince of the northern borderline. This person was greedy and self-opinionated. He definitely wanted to eat up the 3 granaries worth of grain. However, the granary was huge, so this person would definitely mobilize a large number of troops, and even a large portion of the garrison. In this way, the defense of the 3 cities would be quite weak. "Zhengtu, I'll give you 10,000 troops. Can you conquer the 3 cities in 2 days?" Jiang Pengji raised her head and called Fu Wang's name. Fu Wang had been tense all along. When he heard his name, he immediately stepped forward. "Yes, General." Using 10,000 troops to conquer the 3 cities of Shangyu, which Dongqing had been longing for more than a decade, in 2 days? If this was in the past, it would definitely be a fantasy. But now it was different. Jiang Pengji had calculated. According to the various conditions she had created today, it might not be impossible. The second prince of the northern borderline was too greedy. He had the idea of eating up the 3 granaries. It was impossible for him to rely on the 20,000 private troops that he had brought. In order to gather enough manpower, this person had to transfer the garrison of the 3 cities. Before the second prince's arrival, the average garrison of the 3 cities was about 10,000 people. After transferring a portion, how many people would be left? The 3 fake granaries had attracted most of the garrison forces, causing the 3 cities to be empty and weak. The 10,000 troops that she had allocated to Fu Wang were all elites who had been carefully trained for several years and were well equipped. They could definitely withstand such a concentrated battle. Not to mention 1 against 5, but 1 against 3 would not be a problem. If Fu Wang still could not conquer the 3 cities of Shangyu County before the reinforcements from the northern borderline arrived, it would be a disgrace to his reputation. Han Mei. Li Yun stepped forward and quietly waited for orders. Jiang Pengji said, "I order you to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Lijiang. You must annihilate the enemy and not leave any loose ends." "Yes. I plan to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Sangamo. After the enemy is annihilated, Han Mei and I will meet up and cut off the enemy's main force." There were 3 fake granaries, Sangamo, Lijiang, and Chao Wu. Among them, Chao Wu's was the largest. It was almost the sum of the reserves of the other 2 granaries. After discussing with a few strategists, Jiang Pengji unanimously believed that the headstrong second prince would personally lead the troops to ambush Chao Wu. After all, there was the most food there. The evacuation route was the smoothest. The second prince had a penchant for doing things himself and showing off his military strength. In conclusion, it was most likely that the enemy would lead the main force to ambush Chao Wu. In order to delay time and confuse the second prince's judgment, Jiang Pengji placed a lot of food in Chao Wu. Transporting the food would delay their marching speed. When Jiang Pengji and Li Yun waited and devoured the enemy's forces, they could take a shortcut to intercept and ambush the second prince's main force. It would be best if they could capture the second prince alive. If not, they would just kill him. They had to meet up with Fu Wang before the reinforcements at the borders of the north borderline could react. To prevent any accidents, Jiang Pengji ordered the remaining troops to stand guard. After assigning tasks to the generals, Jiang Pengji swiftly and decisively assigned tasks to the strategists. At that moment, the whole main tent was filled with a tense atmosphere. It even affected the viewers in the streaming room. Lo Siji Lianmeng, after so many years, I finally see the streamer's handsome side. Marin Wei Zixiao, hello everyone. Let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend, Lord Jiang Pengji. Zhu Gonggang Jiang Pengji, oh my, click. Beauty Wei Zixia Denguzi, to the person above, are you trying to stir up trouble? Please respect such a hot-blooded scene. Gui Kai Guofengxio, high energy warning ahead. Friends on the blue bullet screen, if you're not used to blood, you'd better leave the streaming room quickly. Let me say this in advance. Our streamer is very cruel. The content of her streaming would scare the timid people out of their wits. The viewers on the red bullet screen were delighted to see this. The viewers on the blue bullet screen were not to be outdone. Although they did not understand, they felt that it was awesome. How could they leave the streaming room and fulfill the wishes of the viewers on the red bullet screen? No. They would not leave. Finally, I've been preparing for more than 3 years. Everyone, it's all up to you. It was time to let the north borderline see her fangs. Chapter 944. The night was gloomy, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Hearing that the second prince was going to fight in person, the guards and advisors around him felt like their heads were going to explode. Your Highness, your body is precious. Swords have no eyes on the battlefield. If you are accidentally hurt, we won't be able to answer to the king. His personal guards tried to dissuade him, and his advisors also echoed him. However, the second prince had a headstrong temperament and felt very good about himself. He said, I studied hard with the martial arts master. Even my father praised me as a warrior of the northern borderline. How can I be afraid of death? Before he was an adult, he had defeated his martial arts master, defeated several guards who were his sparring partners, and killed the enemy bravely on the battlefield. He always brought back a lot of trophies. He was the brave and powerful man of the northern borderline. How could the weak soldiers of the Central Plains hurt him? The northern borderline was not peaceful. There were many voices within. If a small tribe developed too fast or did not obey the orders of the imperial court, it would inevitably lead to an expedition by the imperial court. However, such small fights were usually used for the second generation of the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince had led troops on several expeditions and won every time. This made him arrogant and complacent, and he could not even see his own abilities clearly. As a prince, it was enough to stay in the rear and wait for military achievements. Why did he have to go to the front to cause trouble and make things difficult for his teammates? Did he not know what his own abilities were? The advisors and guards repeatedly tried to persuade the second prince, but not only did they not persuade him, they even caused him to reprimand and insult. In the end, he stubbornly said, "No need to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind." The more the people around him tried to persuade him, the angrier he got, and the more he wanted to prove himself. Lu Shi, a woman, could kill the enemy on the battlefield. He, a brave man of the northern borderline, was inferior to a woman? Wait until I catch Lu Shi myself. The second prince looked around and snorted, as if he was mocking. Although he was headstrong, the second prince also knew that his life was precious, and he would still listen to the advisor's arrangements in some areas. He asked the vanguard troops to change into the uniforms of the Han soldiers and raise Jiang Pengji's flag. It was best if they did not encounter the enemy, but if they encountered the enemy's patrol troops, they could use it to get away with it. The night was dark and windy, and it was suitable for robbery. The second prince ordered everyone to hold wooden chopsticks in their mouths and cover their mouths with cloth. They were not allowed to make any noise. The 12,000 soldiers split into several groups and advanced towards Chao Wu along the small paths on the map. Because of the detailed map in his hand, the second prince led his troops to avoid several waves of sentries, and the journey was more daunting than dangerous. As they approached Chao Wu's granary, the number of patrols increased. Even with the cover of night, they were still caught red-handed. "Who is it?" The second prince panicked. The vanguard officer beside him replied in fluent Mandarin of the Central Plains. "We were sent by Lu Prefecture Overseer to reinforce the granary. The prefecture magistrate is worried that the barbarians of the northern borderline will attack the granary." This vanguard official was also a talent. When he lied, his face didn't turn red, and he didn't even pant. He even revealed a look of awe-inspiring righteousness. The night was too dark, and there was some distance between them, so the guards couldn't see how many people were with the second prince. They asked a few questions and let them pass. The second prince was relieved, but then he felt a little disdainful. That's all, perhaps the luck of the first half of the night had run out. The second prince encountered several patrols in a row, and they were getting more and more adept at dealing with them. Unknowingly, he had been delayed for an hour. At that moment, they were less than a quarter of an hour away from Chao Wu's granary. Compared to the smooth journey on the second prince's side, the other two routes did not have such preferential treatment. Along the way, they only encountered 3 waves of patrols, and they used the same method of lying to fool them. Little did they know that the patrols under Jiang Pengji were different from other patrols. Before dealing with each other, they had to match the secret signal. If the secret signal didn't match, they would be killed. Of course, it was different today. The patrols had received instructions from their superiors that if they met someone they couldn't match the secret signal with, they should not make a sound and cooperate with the other party's performance. The North Borderline thought that their operation was smooth, but they didn't know that their every move was within the enemy's expectations. Li Jiang's granary. Li Yun chewed on some hay in his mouth. He held his spear with one hand and wiped the tip of the spear with the other. His sharp eyes were surging with the desire to fight. Nuanyuan, wait for me to return. Li Yun threw the wiping cloth aside. The hurried footsteps of his subordinates were getting closer. Commander Li Yun, the enemy has formed a formation and surrounded the granary. Just in time. Li Yun straightened his body. He grabbed the white reins of his warhorse with one hand and nimbly flipped himself onto the horse. He held his spear high in the air. Deploy the troops to meet the enemy. At that moment, the sound of fighting could be heard from outside the granary. 2,000 cavalrymen rushed towards Li Jiang's granary. Charge. Based on past experiences, the granary's defensive line would not be able to withstand a single wave of their charge. It would collapse 1,000 miles away. Not to mention that they had appeared suddenly. Chongzhou should not have been prepared. If they met the enemy without any preparation, it would be even more impossible to block the iron hooves of their cavalrymen. It was different this time. When the cavalrymen in rattan armor formed a formation and accelerated their charge, the front hooves of the horses suddenly missed their footing and they fell forward with great inertia. A group of human heads emerged from the ground. They held unknown sickle-like weapons in their hands and ruthlessly slashed at the legs of the horses, causing them to fall forward in pain. After doing that, they immediately retracted their heads into the ground and used the same trick on the second echelon who could not react in time. Dozens of circular trenches were dug around the Lijiang granary in a radius of 200 feet. This was to deal with the first wave of the north borderline's cavalrymen. The distance between the trenches did not follow any pattern. There were even circular waves. To conceal the existence of the trenches, the empty space was covered with grass. Coupled with the cover of the night, no one could see any clues. Near the center of the granary, there were densely packed caltrops scattered between the trenches. Seeing this, the troops from the north borderline also realized that they had fallen into an ambush. Li Jiang's granary was not a piece of fatty meat. It was clearly a trap with fatty meat. However, the cavalry's speed was too fast. A distance of 200 feet was nothing at all. When they realized that it was an ambush and attempted to retreat, the first batch of cavalrymen had already rushed to the granary. You want to retreat? Have you asked for the permission of the spear in my hand? To make it easier to face the enemy, a small path about 5 feet wide was left in all directions of the granary. At the same time, a similar scene was happening in Sang Mo's granary. Jiang Pengji was someone who could not sit still. She did not like to mark documents and was passionate about personally fighting in battle. The north borderline was there to attack the granary and steal the grain. Apart from bringing weapons and troops, their troops also brought along a large number of carriages used to transport the grain. The troops at the front lost and their morale plummeted. The troops at the back tried to retreat. The carriages became an obstacle for their cavalrymen. They were stuck in one place and could not break through in all directions. The quality of the north borderline's cavalrymen was not bad. Although the performance at the back was embarrassing, the remaining cavalrymen began to organize a charge to break through. Horse-slaying battalion, go forward and form a formation. The order was given. A whistling arrow soared into the sky. Chapter 945. Xingyue Tianyun, who was the one with the high energy warning just now? Why don't you make it clear? EW. No, the baby is going to vomit for a while. Has your streaming room always been so bloody and violent? F***ck me, you're going to split me and my horse in half? Streamer Wada June, why hasn't such a bloody and violent live broadcast room been shut down? Feng's remembrance, you make it sound like the streamer who promoted a certain color has been censored. Chow Lauda, watching this kind of live stream in the middle of the night, it's really creepy. Why couldn't the cross-dimensional live stream be more harmonious? It was either pornographic or violent. Watching too much of it would affect the physical and mental health of young children. That was the content of the blue bullet screen. Compared to their panic, the red bullet screen viewers were much calmer. He was not surprised at all. Wuya Zhongsheng, the host, isn't always so violent. She's usually reasonable. She only uses her fists when she can't be reasoned with. Those people from the northern borderline are asking for a beating. My streamer is so handsome that he has no friends. Host, when are you going to marry me? Bellflower in the starry sky, the streamer is a master of the aesthetics of violence. She gets more and more violent every time. In the past, he only knew how to chop people with axes. Now, he could even chop people and horses in half. Full marks for that close-up just now. Jiang Pengji personally led the troops at Sang Mo's granary. When the two parties engaged in battle, she would act as a member of the Zhanma battalion. The horse-chopping battalion was a special battalion that she had specially trained to deal with the cavalry of the northern borderline. The weapons in their hands were all specially forged, and the modeo in their hands was incomparably sharp. The blades were heavy and broad. Compared to the speed of the cavalry, the horse-slaying battalion pursued stability and ruthlessness. They didn't need a lot of speed. They just needed to coordinate with other units to resist the cavalry and reduce the pressure on all sides. The soldiers of the horse-chopping camp were all carefully selected from the various battalions. Their pay was twice as high as that of ordinary soldiers, and their daily training was also much heavier. Because the armors and weapons used by the horse-chopping camp were heavier, the requirement for the soldiers' stamina and strength was higher. If they didn't have a strong physique and strength, they wouldn't be able to fight for a long time. In order to increase their endurance in battle, Jiang Pengji also allowed the soldiers of the Zhanma battalion to adopt the improved three-stage battle tactic of the crossbowmen. Take turns to lighten the load. In addition to all kinds of high-intensity training, the various military camps would also hold regular military exercises. Different units would cooperate and fight against each other. Although the military drill was fake, Jiang Pengji let the veterans lead the new recruits in pursuit of a simulated battle environment. Most of the soldiers under him had never seen blood before, but their combat skills and obedience to orders were not inferior to elite soldiers. The streaming room was always the Jiang Pengji Jiang Zhang's perspective. She, who had always walked the agile route, gave up on speed, and changed the weapon in her hand from a spear to a heavy zamadeo. With every swing of the blade, the audience could clearly see the entire process of the blade slicing through flesh. She did not deliberately restrain her strength. The heavy zamadeo in her hand was like nothing. Chopping. War. Jiang. Jiang. Blood, blood. Blood. The audience of the stream. The Tian. The king. The king. Hu. The Taiwith, the horse. The audience in the streaming room saw with their own eyes that Jiang Pengji swung her sword downwards. Like watching a watermelon, she split open the body of a soldier from the northern borderline's head. She also cut the warhorse under him into two at the waist. Jiang Pengji. The king. The king. The king. The king. Most of the northern borderline cavalry was light cavalry. They followed the rogue policy of running away if they couldn't win. They had always been a headache for the Dongqing military. However, they were blocked by the wagon they brought. Jiang Pengji. The Zhanma battalion formed a curved formation to block their way. She surrounded them. She planned to wipe out the enemy. How could she let the meat fly away? Compared to Sang Mo and Li Jiang, Chao Wu's granary was a rat's paradise. What kind of soldiers are Lu Shi's? The soldiers of the Central Plains are all useless. None of them can fight. The second prince broke through the defense of Chao Wu's granary. The defense of the camp was weak. They fought in a hurry. Soon, they were defeated and ran in all directions. The second prince looked at Chao Wu's granary. He was proud of himself. Don't chase. Move the food. The second prince cut off the heads of the corpses. He tied their hair into knots and hung them on the saddle. These were his spoils of war. They were strong evidence of his military strength. He broke open the door of the granary. It was full of food. To be cautious, the second prince used the dagger at his waist to cut open a few bags of food. Clear yellow grains flowed out like water. Lu Shi is rich. It's all good food. After confirming it, the second prince ordered people to move the food. The advisor followed the second prince. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what. After a while, he said, "Your Highness, there's so much food in Chao Wu's granary. Why didn't Lu Shi send a large number of soldiers to guard it?" The second prince said, "A large number of soldiers? Didn't you see those deserters? There are at least 5,000 or 6,000 of them, right?" According to combat experience, the number of soldiers guarding the granary was about that. However, the advisor didn't know that there were only about 2,000 soldiers guarding the granary. The number of 5,000 or 6,000 was too much. The soldiers seemed disorderly, but they were actually prepared to flee. They ran in other directions. After several trips, it gave the illusion that there were 5,000 or 6,000 deserters. This. I heard that Lu Shi trained his soldiers for 3 or 5 years. His elite soldiers are like this. The advisor awkwardly found a way out for himself to avoid angering the second prince again. The second prince laughed and said, "Sheep are sheep. No matter how they train, how can they beat the wolves on the grassland?" The Han men of the Central Plains gave him the impression that they were weak bamboo poles that could be blown away by the wind. Such men couldn't even satisfy the Han women, let alone fight the valiant generals of the northern borderline. The entire granary of Chao Wu had a total of 1.4 million dawn of grain. Even if the second prince brought 12,000 soldiers and horses, they couldn't load all of them into the supply wagons in a short time. Moreover, they did not bring that many wagons with them. If I had known that there was so much grain here and that the soldiers guarding the grain were so weak, I would have brought 10 more wagons. In order not to waste food, every wagon was filled with grain. The wheels were deeply embedded in the mud. Not only were the wagons full of grain, but he also asked each cavalry to carry 2 bags of grain on their backs. Seeing this, the advisor's scalp went numb. The cavalry's advantage was their mobility. How could they run if they encountered danger with the heavy bags of grain on their backs? "Your Highness, this is not appropriate." Chapter 946. I know what you're worried about. Aren't you afraid of Lu Shi's sudden appearance? You're as timid as a mouse. The second prince laughed. His face was insolent and his eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. He said arrogantly, "So what if she comes? It just so happens that I lack a concubine to warm my bed. If she comes, I can reluctantly accept her. When I'm done playing, I'll let you have a taste of her to boost your courage." The advisor did not refute him because he knew that the second prince was in high spirits and no one could provoke him. He had long been accustomed to the second prince's arrogance. At this time, he could only shake his head tiredly. He was hopeless. Now he could only hope that everything would go smoothly and nothing would go wrong along the way. However, some people could not stand nagging, such as Jiang Pengji, whom the advisor was worried about. The second prince smiled and said, "You're really worrying for nothing. Before he finished speaking, the ground under his feet trembled slightly, as if something was rushing from afar. At first, the movement was so small that it was almost undetectable. As time went by, the movement became more and more obvious. The pebbles on the ground also trembled. The ground moved. This was the advisor's first reaction. His second reaction was. His heart skipped a beat and a terrible idea came to mind. Quickly abandon all the provisions. There's an enemy attack, the advisor roared. The second prince was about to turn over and get on the horse when he suddenly heard the roar. He stumbled and almost fell off the horse. What are you roaring for? Where did the enemy attack come from? The second prince's reaction was a beat slower. The trembling under his feet became more and more obvious. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. Is this an earthquake? The second prince did not think in the direction of the enemy attack at all. He thought that it was a natural disaster. No. It's not an earthquake. It's clearly an enemy attack. Your Highness, please give the order immediately to abandon the provisions and fight. The advisor's breathing was rapid and he was in a panic. It was dark around him as if there were countless giant beasts hibernating in the darkness and staring at him. A feeling of suffocation surged in his heart. The advisor lost his composure and shouted at the second prince, hoping to drown out the commotion around him. The second prince was angry and was about to speak when a scout came riding quickly on a horse. Whoa! The scout turned over and dismounted. He said to the second prince, "There are traces of enemies on the left flank." Unable to determine the specific number, the second prince's eyes widened in shock. How could there be enemies? Could it be that the granary guard who just ran away called for help? That's not right. Chao Wu's granary is 2 days' journey from Lu Shi's military camp. It's only been a few hours. How can he call for reinforcements in time? When the advisor saw that the second prince was still staring at him, he was so angry that he wanted to jump up and curse. Was there even a need to think about such a stupid question? It was clearly premeditated. At this time, the right-wing scout also hurried over on horseback. Report. Our right wing has discovered an unknown number of enemies. The second prince had led his troops to clear out small tribes, but his combat experience was of no value at all. He was dumbfounded when he encountered a big scene. Quickly, abandon the rations and prepare for battle. The advisor was so angry that his face turned red. Now he could not count on the second prince as a teammate at all. He could only rely on him to overstep his authority. The advantage of the cavalry of the northern borderline was their mobility. How could they fight a battle with 2 big sacks of provisions on their backs? Once the horse was engaged in battle with the enemy, it would not be able to gallop. It could only coordinate with the enemy's attacks or trample on them. The advantage of speed would disappear. At this time, if they carried 2 heavy sacks of provisions to fight a battle, perhaps the soldiers on the horses would not die of exhaustion, but the horses would collapse. The second prince's eyes were red. He stared at the advisor and clenched his teeth. Listen to my order. Abandon the rations and form a formation to fight. They had brought too many wagons that were used to steal provisions. They could not form a formation at all. The advantage of charging to cut through the enemy's formation was also lost. Everything happened too suddenly. The second prince, the leader, was a fool. The people below him could only be at a loss like headless flies. Fortunately, they still had the qualities of the soldiers of the northern borderline. When they encountered traces of the enemy, they wanted to form a formation immediately. Due to the obstruction of the wagons, the process seemed slow and inefficient. While they were in a mess, the enemy's army had already attacked from the left and right flanks, outflanking them. Jiang Pengji led the vanguard battalion of the cavalry and took the lead. She took the longbow from the back of the horse and lit the arrow. She let go of the reins while charging and easily pulled the bow to a full moon. Release. Jiang Pengji released the bowstring when she was less than 100 feet away from the enemy troops of the northern borderline. After a buzzing sound, the burning arrow streaked across the sky with a smear of orange and shot into the enemy's territory. After the arrow was fired, she took control of the reins again. She steered the warhorse under her to turn quickly to the other side. The soldiers of the cavalry battalion could not shoot from a long distance like her, but they did a good job. Han Mei really has a tacit understanding. He came neither early nor late. As the saying goes, it is better to come at the right time than to come early. Li Yun's sneak attack was coordinated perfectly. Jiang Pengji had a carefree smile on her face. She galloped on the horse and shot a few waves of fire arrows, all aimed at the cavalry of the northern borderline. Jinsher Minguzi, streamer, the rations are all piled up there. If you fire the fire arrows, won't they all burn? They knew Jiang Pengji's temperament. She was generous to others, but she was stingy with her own food. Every time she ate, she always ate the last grain of rice. To let such a thrifty person set fire to the food that the people had painstakingly cultivated was really heart-wrenching. Pien Kasai, if you don't sacrifice your child, you won't be able to catch the wolf. Using such a batch of rations to exchange for tens of thousands of soldiers and horses from the northern borderline is a great deal. If the cavalry of the northern borderline were to enter the battlefield, not only would the streamer lose rations, but she would also lose many elite troops that she had painstakingly trained. Moreover, didn't you notice that after the fire arrows were fired, the fire quickly grew bigger? After being reminded by the audience in the streaming room, many people came to their senses. That's right, the fire was too big. Although it was a dry and flammable season, it shouldn't have caught fire so easily, right? At that moment, a veteran in the streaming room pointed out the key point. Yiwu Yenling, there's a problem with the rations. The audience strenuously observed. Indeed, they discovered that the stray fire arrows had pierced the rations and the fire had spread quickly. Nuzwang Xinghan, the streamer is indeed wicked. Other than the outermost rations in the Chao Wu granary that are real, the ones inside are all fake, right? No matter how vigilant the enemy is, it is impossible for them to open up all the rations and check them. Just as the audience guessed, Jiang Pengji only put tens of thousands of dawn of real rations in the Chao Wu granary, the rest were all fake. Xinjia, but I have a doubt. If it's fake rations, won't the grain bag feel different when touched? How could Jiang Pengji not consider this problem? She asked someone to smear the inside of the grain bag with a sticky liquid, then rolled it in the rations and stuck a layer of rations on it. Chapter 947. At this time, not only the audience in the live broadcast room found something fishy, but the cavalry of the northern borderline also found something wrong. The advisor felt his teeth tremble. He raised his hand to pull out a dagger and fiercely cut open the grain bag. The inside of the grain bag was thick with grain, but apart from this layer, it was full of hay, firewood, and stones. It was fake, it was all fake. They were fooled. At this moment, the advisor regretted it. Lu Shi was able to get to where he was today, how could he be an ordinary person who relied on his father? If the map of the granary was so easy to get, how could Lu Shi get to where he was today? From the beginning to the end, it was all Lu Shi's plan, to lead their second prince here. In an instant, the advisor's mind turned again and again. He even wanted to escape during the chaos. If he continued to follow the second prince, he wouldn't even know when he would die. But the advisor also knew that he was just a scholar. Without the protection of the soldiers, he might be shot into a hornet's nest as soon as he went out. On the other side, the advisor was experiencing mental torture, and the second prince was not in a good situation either. He had never experienced such a big battle before. When he conquered a small tribe, it seemed that he was the one in command, but in fact, it was the same without him. It was just a small tribe, how could they fight against the iron hooves of the northern borderline? The victory of the small tribe made the second prince arrogant, and he had no idea of his real ability. He thought that if others praised him for being brave and good at fighting, he would really be brave and good at fighting. He didn't know that if he was not the second prince of the northern borderline king, he was not even a fart. At most, he was an arrogant bastard. Don't panic, I will kill anyone who dares to panic. Get into formation, get into formation, get into formation, do you hear me, damn, who dares to escape? No matter how stupid he was, he knew how bad the situation was. The fire spread, and the war horse was frightened and kept running around. It took the second prince a lot of effort to calm it down. The soldiers around him were in a mess, like headless flies. He was angry and pulled out his sword to cut off the head of the person next to him, relying on bloody means to win a trace of calmness. Needless to say, this trick really worked, and the formation of the northern borderline soldiers finally had some shape. The advisor hurriedly said, "Your Highness, the most important thing right now is your safety." His words reminded the second prince of something. Nothing was more important than his life. Round after round of fire arrows were fired from the outside. It was as if Lu Shi's soldiers were surrounding them from all directions. It was impossible to find a way out. If the cavalry wanted to charge out of the sea of fire, Lu Shi's soldiers would stop them and force them back. The second prince grabbed his advisor's wrist in a panic. How do we break out? The advisor said, naturally, we'll gather our forces and break through from the weakest point. How could he ask such a stupid question? This teammate was too much of a scammer. The second prince took a few deep breaths and summoned his personal guards to prepare to break out of the encirclement. Although he had 12,000 soldiers with him, most of them were cavalry. If the terrain was open, breaking out of the encirclement would not be a problem. How could a two-legged man outrun a four-legged horse? Unfortunately, they were also carrying a large number of supply wagons, which were filled with heavy sacks of grain, further limiting the range of movement of the cavalry. Apart from that, Jiang Pengji also set fire to the rations on the carriages. They had no time to care about anything else. Lu Shi, B***TCH. The second prince gritted his teeth in anger. He did not know what went wrong, but he knew that there was something wrong with the map he had obtained. If it was not premeditated, how could Lu Shi have calculated it so accurately? It was estimated that not only Chao Wu's granary, but Li Zhang's and Sang Mo's granaries were also ambushed. The second prince's eyes reddened when he thought of the private troops he had spent a lot of money to raise. Your Highness, now is not the time to be angry. Where there's life, there's hope. Your safety is more important. The advisor interrupted the second prince's thoughts. It was more important to escape now. What was the point of thinking so much? The two sides broke through the encirclement. The second prince, escorted by more than 1,000 elites, prepared to break out of the encirclement. When Jiang Pengji received the news, her face revealed a blood-stained and hideous smile. Escape? Have you asked me? After you catch him, break his legs. She put the bow and arrows back on the horse's back and picked up the heavy Mo sword again. Catch him alive. After Jiang Pengji's reminder, the audience in the streaming room realized that the enemy leader was about to escape. How could he do that? Lo Siji Lianmeng, although the streamer used a trick, they are still a group of cavalrymen. I look down on them for running away before the battle even starts. Cat Demon June, running away when you can't win is the essence of cavalrymen. Usually, it's either a small defeat or a big victory. It's probably unprecedented in history to be so miserable. Who asked them to be greedy? But then again, the person who made the plan was too evil. Let me worship for 2 seconds. But then again, who was the person who made the plan this time? The audience was stunned for a moment and almost forgot about it. Xinjia, this plan was made by Beauty CI, the streamer, and Sun Wen, right? But the chief planner is that old man Sun Wen. This old man has a bright future. When he's done undercover, he'll be among the top strategists. The trick was used too well. Who was Sun Wen? The audience was stunned for another 2 seconds. They couldn't be blamed for their poor memory. It was because Sun Wen had never appeared in the streaming room and they hadn't seen him. Mo Lingyin, Sai, Sun Wen, I've personally witnessed the rise of another Prince Charming in the streaming room. Although Sun Wen was an old man whose grandson was 7 or 8 years old, his charm didn't discriminate by age. The audience paid unprecedented attention to Sun Wen. Jiang Pengji couldn't care less about the streaming room. She led the troops to chase after the second prince and his men. What a joke. Capturing the second prince would be considered a real victory. If they let this fat fish escape, the value of this operation would be reduced by at least 50%. The advisor held the reins tightly and leaned over the horse's back. The warhorse was too bumpy. He felt as if his internal organs were going to be shaken out. There are pursuers behind us. The second prince only cared about running for his life. His nerves had long been stretched taut. Hearing that there were pursuers behind him, he was so anxious that he whipped the horses but hard and tried to speed up. Hurry, 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 he screamed anxiously in his heart. Unfortunately, the gods of the grassland didn't hear his prayers. The god of slaughter had already drawn his bow and arrow from behind him. He pulled the bow fully and suddenly released it. There was a buzzing sound in his ears, like a cool breeze blowing beside his ears. In the next moment, he felt something sharp piercing into his right shoulder. The sharp pain spread from his shoulder to his whole body. He couldn't maintain his posture. He screamed and fell directly from the horse to the ground. Capture the barbarians of the northern borderline alive. Jiang Pengji put away her bow and arrow. She took out her mo sword and chopped off the heads of several people at the end of the enemy troops. Chapter 948. Ah, a loud and tragic cry sounded. The second prince's shoulder was pierced by Jiang Pengji's arrow. The intense pain and the residual force of the arrow forced him to lose his balance and fall off the horse. His horse sprinted forward for a long distance due to inertia. Fortunately, the second prince was lucky. He was not trampled by the horse's hooves and caused a second injury, but he was dizzy from the fall. The advisor, who was holding the reins, heard the movement and looked back from the horse's back. The second prince had fallen off the horse. The pursuers behind him were quickly closing the distance. Now there were only two options in front of him. Either he turned around and went back to save the second prince, or he continued to run. Escape was the best strategy of the 36 stratagems. These two options went through the advisor's mind. He chose the former without hesitation. It was not because he was loyal, but because he knew that this was a battlefield and Jiang Pengji's territory. If he chose the latter and ran away alone, there was a 99% chance that he would be caught by Lu Shi's troops who were cleaning up the battlefield. The probability of his death was extremely high. Even if he was lucky enough to escape, there was no way for him to return to the northern borderline safely. Even if he returned to the northern borderline, he would definitely die. He could not afford to lose a prince of the northern borderline. On the contrary, if he turned back at this time, there was a high chance that he would become a captive. He would lose his freedom, but his life would be guaranteed. If he was lucky, he might have a chance to be recruited. He could take advantage of the situation and jump onto Lu Shi's ship. It was a way out. In a split second, the advisor had thought through everything and even arranged a seemingly perfect escape route for himself. Second prince, come and save his highness. The advisor turned his horse around. When he arrived, several soldiers of the northern borderline had already carried the unconscious second prince onto the back of the horse. However, they could not stop the enemies who were approaching quickly from behind. Not to mention the ruthless killer. You send the second prince away first. I will stay with the others to delay them. The advisor secretly gritted his teeth and made a decision. It seemed that he was making a righteous decision, but in fact, he was playing a petty trick. The enemy's hatred was always on the second prince. Even if they stayed to delay them, the enemy would split up to chase after them. The personal guard did not say much. He raised his hand and whipped the horse. The horses neighed in pain and galloped madly. In less than 2 breaths, the enemies at the very front had arrived. My life is over. The advisor chose to hide behind the soldiers to preserve his life as much as possible. Jiang Pengji rushed and killed several people along the way. She had the imposing manner of killing anyone who stood in her way and killing anyone who stood in her way. The advisor's heart was about to burst from fear. Kill anyone who dares to resist. The rest of you, follow me. She said that she would break his legs if she caught him, and she meant it. Jiang Pengji did not stop at all. She rode on her horse and killed from left to right. The warhorse under her raised its hooves and stomped on the ground. Soon, the cavalrymen who were left behind were killed and their horses were thrown off their feet. Jiang Pengji chased after the second prince. The cavalry of the northern borderline tried to stop them, but the cavalry vanguard battalion led by Jiang Pengji was not to be trifled with. Jiang Pengji's night vision was excellent. Others might only be able to see a blurry silhouette, but she could see it clearly. Jiang Pengji aimed at the second prince, who was carried by the guards of the northern borderline, and pulled out another arrow. Zhao Yue, ha ha ha, I feel sorry for the second prince. If his subordinates did not drag him away, he would only have to suffer once. Jiang Pengji once again demonstrated her superb archery skills. With one arrow, she shot through the second prince and the guards who were carrying him. If she did not want to capture him alive, the arrow would have been aimed at their vital parts. Yuran Ma Shangxing, Tisk, TSK. The warhorse is not much shorter than an adult. He was shot by 2 arrows and fell off the warhorse twice. How unlucky must he be to be able to do that? From what I see, even if the streamer showed mercy, the second prince will still become silly from the fall. Zizhu Lin Shuxian, pft, the person above, you are wrong. Why would the second prince need to fall silly? His IQ and brain are not that great, right? After falling, maybe he did not become silly. Instead, he became smarter. After all, he could not be any more silly. Su Shuoei, the streamer's archery skills are so amazing that I have no friends. Can you guys make it? When I saw the dazzling arrow she shot in the live streaming room, it did not feel like it fell on the husky prince. It clearly hit the baby's heart, his whole body. Li Wushuang, the husky prince, flips the table. Do you think I don't care about my reputation? When the audience in the live streaming room jokingly called the second prince of the northern borderline the husky prince, Jiang Pengji had already caught up with them. Needless to say, which mortal body could withstand the Zamadeo in her hand and her strange strength? People were cutting melons and vegetables, but she was cutting people like melons and vegetables. With one slash, not only the person, but also the horse that the person was riding was cut into 2. Pfft, after a quarter of an hour, Jiang Pengji spat out the blood that had accidentally flowed into her mouth. The elites of the northern borderline still had some courage. Half of them resisted stubbornly and were killed, while the other half gave up because their morale was greatly reduced. Jiang Pengji's chest rose and fell rapidly. She breathed rapidly and shouted angrily, "Tie them all up." How about the animals? How about them? Yes. The subordinate obeyed the order. Jiang Pengji threw the Zamadeo in her hand to the side and asked, "Where is the fat fish?" Jiang Pengji could use such a contemptuous term as fat fish to humiliate her opponent, but the vanguard battalion under her did not dare to say the same. The enemy's general has been captured. 2 soldiers dragged the second prince, who had been shot twice and had fainted. Accompanying him was the advisor, who was in a sorry state. The advisor was dressed like a scholar. At a glance, it was obvious that he was a scholar who engaged in intellectual activities. The soldiers were not too rough with him. Jiang Pengji snorted coldly and said, "Wake him up." The advisor's shoulders were held by someone and he could not move. He secretly glanced at Jiang Pengji, but his vision was dim. She was covered in blood from head to toe, and he could not knock her out. Although he could not see it, he could feel the terrifying aura that lingered around her. Even the king of the northern borderline did not have such an aura. When the soldiers came forward with a torch, the advisor tried his best to blink and stretch his neck to look at Jiang Pengji. Suddenly, Jiang Pengji turned her head and glared at him. Her eyes were full of intimidation. The advisor was so scared that he retracted his neck, lowered his head, and shrunk his shoulders. He did not dare to make a sound. On the other side, the soldiers followed Jiang Pengji's instructions and forcefully woke the second prince up. When he woke up, he was surrounded by a circle of people. These people were dressed very strangely, and the leader looked at him coldly as if he was looking at a dead man. The second prince suddenly shivered. He accidentally injured 2 arrow wounds. The pain made him want to faint. I said, Jiang Pengji panted heavily and took 2 steps forward to the side of the second prince. Chapter 949. When the second prince heard this, he shivered and almost forgot the pain in his body. He stared at Jiang Pengji and said fiercely, "The winner takes it all. What's there to talk about?" Hee hee. The winner takes it all? That's nice to hear. Jiang Pengji lifted her foot and kicked his face to the side. It didn't take long for it to swell. The advisor's eyes widened. He looked at Jiang Pengji and then at the second prince. After all, the second prince was the prince of the northern borderline. His identity had important political and strategic significance. Even if Jiang Pengji captured him, she should treat him well, not to mention humiliating him. Jiang Pengji could use this person to exchange for a lot of strategic resources from the northern borderline. It wasn't that she didn't understand this principle, but she still did it. Was this considered humiliation? If she didn't care about his worthless life, that kick would have sent his head flying. How could it just be a swollen face? Lu Shi. There's a saying in the Central Plains that goes like this: you can kill me or cut me up, but you can't humiliate me. The second prince was tough for once. As the prince of the northern borderline, he was the most promising candidate for the throne. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Of course not. I'm going to step on you and humiliate you. What can you do to me? Jiang Pengji lifted her foot and stepped on his face so that he couldn't get up. She used a little strength and forced half of his face into the ground. The second prince was furious. The advisor was quiet. The audience in the streaming room didn't even dare to breathe. Through the screen, they could feel the anger in Jiang Pengji. It was like an active volcano that had been suppressed for a long time. Maybe in the next moment, the eruption of magma could bring about a scene of doomsday. The streamer had always been good-tempered. Why was she suddenly so violent? The audience was puzzled, but they believed that Jiang Pengji must have a reason for doing so. In fact, it was true. As mentioned earlier, Jiang Pengji had excellent night vision. With the help of the camera in the streaming room, the surrounding scene was as bright as day. In this way, she could clearly see the string of heads strung on the second prince's saddle. Sacrifices were inevitable in war. Jiang Pengji arranged for those people to guard the Chao Wu granary. She knew that the risk factor they faced was extremely high. It was very likely that they would all be wiped out. She had seen through life and death in her previous life. As long as it was a war, there would always be sacrifices. Even if it wasn't this person, it would be someone else, or even herself. The death of the soldiers could not trigger her anger, but she could not tolerate the act of humiliating the remains of the soldiers. I said, I'll break your legs. I meant what I said. Half of the second prince's face hurt, and the pain affected his hearing, so he did not hear what the man had said. The advisor's scalp went numb as he listened. He watched helplessly as Jiang Pengji took 2 steps back and raised her foot to step on his knee. He exerted force with his right foot and crushed the ground with the tip of his toe. Jiang Pengji did not use much strength, but the second prince's knee made a bone-cracking sound. The second prince was in so much pain that his entire body was convulsing, and he screamed incessantly. His shrill screams made everyone present tense up, and they felt a chill run down their spines. After letting out a shrill scream, the second prince fainted with a pale face. Everyone who witnessed this shuddered in fear. However, there were also some thick-skinned audience members who ridiculed him. Kumo lemon juice, how is this breaking his legs? This is clearly breaking his kneecaps while he's still alive. Jiang Pengji released her foot and said to the person beside her, take him away. Send someone to take good care of his wounds. Don't let him die. The advisor heaved a long sigh of relief when he heard this. It seemed that Lu Shi was ruthless, but she was still rational. Little did he know that Jiang Pengji did not kill him on the spot because she wanted him to die more miserably. My lord, Li Yun led a group of soldiers and horses to catch up. He was slightly injured, but his face was still rosy and he was in high spirits. The person has been caught. Clean up the battlefield, Jiang Pengji said coldly. Rest and reorganize. The army will set off tomorrow morning. Li Yun said, this general obeys. I hope Shengtu's side does not disappoint. She was a little irritable. If Fu Wang failed to take down the 3 cities, or if the losses from taking down the 3 cities exceeded expectations, she would be furious. Li Yun said calmly, "My lord, please rest assured. General Fu will definitely bring you good news." No matter what, Fu Wang was once the #1 general under the Mengs. Taking down cities was not a problem. Oh, I hope so. If Fu Wang could not take down the 3 empty cities where most of his troops had been transferred, he would not live up to his reputation. The advisor had not been taken away yet. He faintly heard the conversation between Jiang Pengji and Li Yun. His heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered that the second prince had rushed over to steal the grain and transferred away most of the garrison. Without sufficient garrison, how could the 3 cities of Shangyu resist Lu Shi's well-prepared army? Lu Shi had taken down the 3 cities as easily as taking something out of his pocket. Thinking of this, the advisor regretted it so much that his intestines turned green. From the moment the second prince obtained the distribution map of the granaries to the current defeat, it was clearly a meticulous scheme by the other party. On the other hand, Fu Wang's performance did not disappoint his illustrious reputation. His fighting spirit was high. Within 2 days, he had taken down the 3 cities consecutively. He was invincible. Without spending much effort, he had taken back the 3 cities that the people of Dongqing had yearned for a long time. A flag with the word Lu was raised on the city walls. When Jiang Pengji arrived, Fu Wang was sending people to clean up the battlefield and retrieve the corpses of the sacrificed soldiers. "Greetings, my lord. Fortunately, I did not fail you." Strictly speaking, this was Fu Wang's first battle after joining Jiang Pengji's camp. If Fu Wang's performance was not outstanding enough, it would more or less affect his prestige in the army. "Thank you for your hard work." Jiang Pengji stood on the city walls and looked into the distance. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile. The 3 cities of Shangyu were located at the border between the northern borderline and Dongqing. Their city walls were tall, wide, thick, and hard. It was like a natural moat guarding the area. The 3 cities were built along the mountain range and relied on the natural barrier. Past this mountain range was the territory of the northern borderline. The northern borderline occupied the 3 cities. Without the mountain range as a hindrance, they could use the 3 cities as a base to attack Dongqing. It was precisely because of this that Dongqing had been so afraid of the northern borderline all these years. Now that the 3 cities were in Jiang Pengji's hands, the situation was completely reversed. Sun Wen had once fooled the 4th prince by saying that the construction of the 3 cities would slow down Jiang Pengji's progress in the north. There was nothing wrong with this sentence. The mistake was that Jiang Pengji had no intention of rebuilding the 3 cities. She was already preparing to attack the northern borderline. The 3 cities of Shangyu were the center of the war. Was there any point in developing this place? From the beginning, Jiang Pengji had planned to build the 3 cities of Shangyu into strategic military locations. She would use them as a springboard to attack the northern borderline. The basic construction of the 3 cities of Shangyu was still there. With a little modification, they could be put into use to defend against strong enemies. Jiang Pengji said to Fu Wang, "Increase the number of troops to guard the 3 cities." The border guards of the northern borderline should have reacted by now. However, even if they reacted, it would be too late. Chapter 950. The second prince was afraid that others would find out about his plan to steal the grain and steal his credit, so he guarded against others like a thief. He volunteered to guard the 3 cities of Shangyu, and found an excuse to dismiss the former garrison general. Because of this, the border guards of Northern Territory hadn't received any news about Fu Wang conquering the 3 cities of Shangyu. By the time they received the news, Jiang Pengji and Li Yun had already brought reinforcements to reinforce the 3 cities of Shangyu. Relying on the sturdiness of the city walls and a large number of defensive weapons, they defended the 3 cities with all their might. The soldiers of the northern borderline did not have enough logistical reserves. If the 2 sides confronted each other, the northern borderline would definitely give in and retreat. Jiang Pengji looked at the densely packed enemy troops below the city walls. Her ears were filled with their curses and vulgarities. "Your Highness, Why don't you let me lead the troops to face the enemy and teach them a lesson? Han Mei, stay calm. Qiguan Rang glanced at his lord's cold face and tugged at Li Yun's armor in a low voice to prevent this fellow from acting on impulse. Counselor, how can we endure this? These northern borderline barbarians are scolding. Li Yun swallowed the rest of his words, but his expression was still filled with rage. The Lord has her own decisions. Do you think she likes to suffer losses? Qiguan Rang advised in a low voice. Why are the people outside cursing her so harshly? Isn't it just to provoke us into sending troops to meet the enemy? It won't do us any good to send troops now. As the 3 cities of Shangyu had just been conquered, most of the people living in these cities were people who were close to the northern region. If they take advantage of the time we are facing the enemy and secretly attack us from the inside, we might lose the 3 cities that we have plotted with great difficulty. Let them shout and curse. They won't be able to hold on for more than a few days and will withdraw on their own. Li Yun was no longer the youngster from before. Of course, he could see the battle situation clearly. However, listen to the content of the curses outside. Insulting them for being cowards was one thing. This kind of insignificant scolding was nothing. Flirting with their lord, making all kinds of dirty jokes and dirty words, and even bringing in the lord's maternal relatives. This was too despicable. If we allow them to continue insulting us, where will our lord's dignity be? Li Yun was so angry that his eyes widened. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his weapon tightly. Even the good-tempered little angel couldn't stand it anymore. The person these people from the northern borderline were insulting was their lord. Even if it was just verbal obscenities, if word got out, what would happen to the lord's reputation? Everyone understands this, but if the lord doesn't say anything, what can we do? Qiguan Rang gripped the handle of his fan tightly. He looked calm and composed, but his anxious action of fanning revealed his true emotions. Qiguan Rang and the others were not the only ones who could not take it anymore. The viewers in the live streaming room were also anxious. They wanted nothing more than to rush into the screen and argue with the soldiers of the northern borderline. Holy sh*t, was their family's little princess someone anyone could insult? Believe it or not, they will use Hua Nation's language to scold these bastards of the Beijiang to death. When it came to the essence of scolding people, how could these uncivilized barbarians of the northern borderline be their opponents? Lo Cg Lianmeng, streamer, they're cursing so harshly. It's not like you to continue tolerating it. What kind of anchors should they know? There was nothing to lose. They had to admit that they understood Jiang Pengji quite well. What's the rush? I'm the one being scolded, but I'm not worried at all. Jiang Pengji smiled and comforted Li Yun. Her mental fortitude was far stronger than everyone imagined. It was just verbal abuse, it was not enough to make her lose her mind. To deal with such despicable people, we can only use more despicable methods. But shrews scolding each other is bad for manners, we can't do that. She muttered to Fu Wang, who was standing silently by the side. Zhengtu, I have something for you to do. Fu Wang's heart skipped a beat. He moved forward to listen to Jiang Pengji's instructions and sighed with emotion. They were indeed despicable. After a quarter of an hour, the soldiers of the northern borderline scolded until their mouths were dry, but the guards on the city wall still did not move. The general of the northern borderline sneered and said sarcastically, "Is this Lu Shi a man or a woman? He doesn't even respond to our scolding." The people of the northern borderline scolded Jiang Pengji the same way the shrews in the marketplace scolded the prostitutes. Any woman would have jumped off a building in anger after being scolded by thousands of people. Lu Shi was thick-skinned. Maybe he's enjoying it and thinks we're not doing enough. The deputy general had a meaningful look on his face. That's true. Continue scolding, don't stop. As soon as he finished speaking, a few people emerged from the quiet city wall. Hey, it's working. Don't stop, continue. This Lu Shi is really strange. He won't come out until we're scolding him. Ha ha ha. The soldiers of the northern borderline beside them also roared with laughter. But soon, they could not laugh anymore. A few ladders extended from the battlements of the city wall, and a few men who had been stripped naked were tied up and hung out. When the wind blew, a few men floated in the air. Behind them, there were rows of northern borderline captives who had been stripped naked, shivering in fear. Damn! What the hell was Lu Shi doing? You're afraid now? Who asked these barbarians to be so despicable? We have no choice. Fu Wang used the handle of his spear to poke the waist of the second prince's advisor. His clothes were intact, but he was also tied up like a dumpling. He was in a sorry state. The advisor's eye bags were bruised, and his cracked and dry lips looked pale. He was like a bird frightened by the mere twang of a bow. When Fu Wang poked him, his legs went soft and he almost collapsed to the ground. Fu Wang raised his eyebrows and laughed disdainfully. You're smart if you don't want to be stripped and hung up. In order to survive, the advisor could only close his eyes in despair and shout at the bottom of the city wall at the top of his lungs. I'm the advisor of the second prince. You've seen the prince. Hurry up and save him. Fu Wang raised his hand to pick his ear and frowned. I'm not shouting loudly enough. Continue. The advisor's voice was already thin. Now that he forced himself to shout at the top of his lungs, his voice became hoarse after 2 shouts. Hearing that the person hanging on the city wall was the second prince of the northern borderline soldiers below were in an uproar. What are you panicking about? Lu Shi is lying to you. Continue scolding. The general of the northern borderline shouted. The soldiers quickly calmed down and continued to curse. The sparse curses became louder again. Fu Wang, who was on the city wall, smiled as he knocked his bow and shot an arrow, breaking a hemp rope. The person hanging on the hemp rope screamed and fell down, turning into a pool of flesh. Hang him up, Fu Wang ordered coldly. The soldiers behind him tied up the naked northern borderline soldiers and hung them up the ladder that extended out of the wall back to the previous position. Witnessing this scene with their own eyes, the people who were hanging earlier were so scared that they urinated and urinated. Filth dripped down from the air. The louder the cursing, the more Fu Wang did not stop. More than a dozen hemp ropes were broken in succession. All the people hanging fell to their deaths without exception. No one knew who Fu Wang would kill next. The advisor of the second prince was so scared that he almost collapsed. The second prince, who was hanging in the center near the city wall, screamed and kicked his feet. His face was covered with snot and tears. Chapter 951. The general guarding the northern borderline knew the second prince. Seeing this, his face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The northern borderline was used to playing rogue, but they didn't expect Lu Shi, who was born in a noble family, to be even more shameless than them. Not only did they strip the captives naked and hang them on the city wall, but they also used them as shooting targets. If they were ordinary captives, it would be fine if a few died, but there was the second prince of the northern borderline among them. A prince of a country was stripped naked and hung on the city wall by the enemy? How shameful and humiliating was that? Our Lord said that you northern borderline men are so courageous. Why do you need to stand in front of the battle and bark? Why don't you just attack the city to your heart's content and save your comrades? If you don't have the guts to attack, shut up. Thanks to your second prince, we have at least 5,000 captives from the northern borderline here, if not 10,000. No matter how long you curse, we will hang some and throw some. The besieging northern borderline general was so angry that he vomited blood. They didn't know whether to curse or not. If they cursed, the second prince might be the next one to be smashed into meat paste. If they didn't curse, why would he stay under the city wall with thousands of elites? Watching a few naked guys in the sky poop, vomit, and pee all over the place? General, what should we do now? The deputy general asked the chief general timidly. It was awkward for thousands of them to stay there without doing anything. The chief general was furious. He wanted to whip the deputy general who didn't know what to do. You ask me? Who should I ask? General, why don't we try to attack the city? Lu Shi has only occupied the 3 cities of Shangyu for 2 days. His foundation is not stable. It's a good time to attack the city. Besides, the troops in the city may not be full. Maybe they are deliberately mystifying and trying to deceive us. Another deputy general was more cultured and spoke in a genteel manner. The Central Plains has a strategy called the Empty City Strategy. Maybe Lu Shi is using this strategy to deceive us. Now that the second prince is in their hands, if the humiliation today is spread, the northern borderline royal family will lose face. They insulted Jiang Pengji. The content of their insults were all vulgar words. There was no evidence at all, and outsiders would not believe it. But it was true that the second prince was hung on the city wall and humiliated. Thousands of eyes were watching. Who would be more shameful if word of this got out? The deputy general added, General, if we retreat without any movement, I'm afraid it'll be hard to explain to the king. This sentence was the last straw that broke the camel's back, forcing the commander to make up his mind. Okay, attack the city. If the king of the northern borderline knew that he had retreated without even attacking the city, he was afraid that he would not be able to keep his life. Stuck in a dilemma, he could only try his best. But, attacking the city with cavalry? Jiang Pengji sneered, this is probably the funniest joke I've heard this year. The advantages of cavalry were obvious, but the disadvantages were equally obvious. These people had rushed here in a hurry and did not bring enough siege weapons. The ancient city walls were tall and wide, and the cavalry's mobility advantage was completely useless. They did not have enough siege weapons, and their horses were not heavenly horses with wings. How could they break through the city walls? Jiang Pengji was not the only one who was clear about this. The people from the northern borderline were even clearer about it. They pretended to attack for a while, then left behind thousands of corpses and retreated dejectedly. The second prince, who was hanging on the city wall, could not even pee. Jiang Pengji glanced at him and said coldly, they will come again tomorrow. Continue to hang these people, but remember not to kill them, especially the second prince. In the future, when we go to war with the northern borderline, I'm prepared to use his blood and head as a sacrifice. It'll be a pity if he dies. Fu Wang accepted the order. Yes. After Jiang Pengji left, Fu Wang sent someone to check the captives hanging on the ladder. The second prince was probably a cockroach. He had a strong vitality. He had 2 pierced wounds on his shoulders and broken kneecaps by Jiang Pengji, but such serious injuries did not kill him. He was still panting, his body trembling as he curled up. He looked very pitiful. The other captives did not have the courage to do so. A few of them were scared to death. Fu Wang waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to tie up the captives who were waiting in line and hang them up. Just as Qiguan Rang had predicted, the troops of the northern borderline did not have enough logistics. They could not keep up with the food supply, so they retreated after 2 days of siege. As they retreated, the news that the 3 cities of Shangyu had been reclaimed spread. The people in the north and south had different feelings. Master Yuanjing stretched his back and sighed with a smile. If they don't fly for 3 years, they will grow wings. If they don't fly, they will not sing. If they don't fly, they will soar to the sky. If they don't sing, they will shock the world. This is the true meaning of, if they don't sing, they will shock the world with a single brilliant feat. Upon receiving the news, the forces in Wanzhou were jubilant. The people in Dongqing were even more jubilant. They were as happy as if they were celebrating the new year. The 3 cities of Shangyu had always been a fishbone in the hearts of the people of Dongqing. Unfortunately, the northern borderline was too powerful, so they could not reclaim it. But now, Jiang Pengji had reclaimed it. The people of the world began to take this female lord seriously. Dongqing, Zhangzhou. This is how a daughter should be. Father was right. Yang Tao put down the secret report. His expression became more solemn. He felt that the weight on his shoulders had increased by 2 notches. Not to mention other countries, Dongqing alone had so many strong opponents. He was afraid that he would fail his late father's expectations. The incident with Yang Jian had made him grow up a lot. The childishness of the past had been worn away, leaving only fortitude and maturity. However, faced with the situation of being besieged on all sides, he still felt a little lost. Yan Lin saw Yang Tao's emotions and comforted him. Don't belittle yourself. Zhengze is not bad either. Yes, companions are the best. Dongqing, Haozhou. Ha 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 ha. I knew it. Lanting is indeed a rare, stalwart man in the world. I-oh, madam. When Huang Song received the news, he was having a private conversation with his wife. As soon as he finished lamenting, Lady Qi pinched the soft flesh on his waist. Lady Qi corrected him. She is a woman. What do you mean by saying that she is a man? Are you looking down on women? Huang Song was speechless. How had he offended Lady Qi? When Huang Song's capable strategist, Qing Jing, heard the news, he tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Dongqing, Shi County, Hu County. The Su and Pei brothers killed the former chief of Hu County, Wuma Shang, while fighting amongst themselves. They peacefully divided up Wuma Shang's property and territory. Without the interference of external forces, they resumed their state of internal strife. Su Bei and Jiang Pengji called each other brothers. When he heard that she had reclaimed the 3 cities of Shangyu, he was happy for her from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't that Su Bei was righteous. It was simply because Jiang Pengji did not hinder his interests. With her standing guard in the north to resist the pressure from the northern borderline, he could not have asked for more. Su Bei smiled and sighed. Lanting actually has the ability to reclaim the 3 cities of Shangyu and truly make a name for himself. He really cannot be underestimated. Beside him, a tall and slender strategist dressed in green said calmly, "This is a good opportunity for my lord." Good opportunity? What does Wenbin mean? Chapter 952. Forming an alliance and borrowing power. Su Bei furrowed his brows in embarrassment. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult. She's already 19. She's a little old. Han Yu was startled. He looked at his lord's face and asked silently, "Where is your brain going? What does forming an alliance have to do with someone's age?" In the end, she was his lord. No matter how stupid she was, she had to give him face and not let him make a fool of himself. "It's okay," Han Yu said. Su Bei shook his head like a rattledrum. "That won't do. My eldest son is only 10 years old. I can't bear to push him into the fire pit." Han Yu was expressionless, but in fact, he was dumbfounded. Su Bei saw that Han Yu did not respond and thought that Han Yu was silently resisting. He said helplessly, "Wenbin, you can't possibly make me, your lord, go there personally. This won't do. Whether Lanting is willing to marry or not is another matter. Even if she is willing to marry, the first wife is still around and her subordinates are not willing." Since ancient times, the alliance had always used 2 methods. First, it was an exchange of benefits. Second, it was a marriage alliance. Most of the time, these 2 situations would complement each other and coexist. Although their relationship by marriage wasn't strong, it was better than not having this relationship to make him feel at ease. After Han Yu recovered from the shock, he calmed down and said helplessly, "I'm afraid my lord has misunderstood. I didn't mean that." This time, it was Su Bei's turn to feel awkward. But as a lord, which one of them was not thick-skinned? He quickly regained his composure, coughed twice, and asked calmly, "Wenbin, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense." Han Yu said, "My lord has a good relationship with Lu Shi. Why don't you send someone to prepare a batch of provisions and send her a generous gift to congratulate her for taking down the 3 cities of Shangyu? My lord, you don't have to be afraid." You can directly describe the conflict between you and Second Master Su. After the beginning of spring, Lu Shi was bound to wage war with the northern borderline. One could imagine how much pressure he would be under. We can't support her troops, but we can allocate some rations to her. The territory under Su Bei's rule was one of the few fertile lands in Dongqing. The food was plentiful and there was no need to worry about food and drink. They were not short of food. Although Jiang Pengji had been farming for many years, the war consumed too much food. Once there was a shortage of food, they could only tighten their belts and fight. The gift was just an excuse. The real purpose was to hint to Jiang Pengji that the two families should form an alliance. She supported Su Bei, and Su Bei gave her rations. Both parties took what they needed. Not only that, but Su Bei could also gain a good reputation. Supporting Jiang Pengji was equivalent to contributing to the resistance against the foreign tribes. He didn't need to pay a single soldier. He only needed to contribute a bit of food and he would be able to benefit from it. Su Bei thought about it and nodded in agreement to Han Yu's suggestion. Since that's the case, let's do as Wen Bin says. Su Bei was very annoyed with that cousin of his. Unfortunately, the other party was always opposing him. It was infuriating. In terms of seniority, no matter what, he was more qualified to be the successor of the Su family. However, that old undying grandfather of his doted on his youngest son and grandson, oppressing him, the eldest son of the first wife, in every way. Their battle was already out in the open, and Su Bei had nowhere to retreat. If he could borrow Lu Shi's power and influence to suppress Su Fei, Su Bei would be more than willing. Nanxing Nation, Jiangzhou. As the saying goes, nothing in this world is difficult for those who set their minds to it. And Shui's persistent pestering finally moved Lu Zheng's heart. The feeling of having a strategist and not having one was really different. When he didn't have a strategist, he had to rely on himself. His internal affairs were a mess, and he didn't have anyone to help him strategize. With the help of a strategist, the organization was reinvigorated, and everything was arranged properly. Lu Zheng was deeply moved by Shui and came out of seclusion to assist him. In the first battle, he helped Shui conquer half of Jiangzhou, stabilizing his foundation. Now that more than a year had passed, Lu Zheng had successfully won over the hearts of Shui's subordinates and stabilized his position as the #1 strategist. It was a little embarrassing to say it, but there were no decent strategists under Shui's command, except for Lu Zheng himself. "Teacher, are you still not asleep?" The boy's servant lit the lamp and added oil to it, making it easier for Lu Zheng to read. "Today's matter ends today. It's hard for me to sleep if I haven't finished it." Lu Zheng was dressed in plain pajamas with a large cloak draped over his shoulders. Half of his face flickered in the orange candlelight. The boy's servant sighed. If he had known that Shui would be so tired, he wouldn't have persuaded his teacher to help Shui. "What are you reading, teacher?" The boy's servant noticed that Lu Zheng had been looking at the secret report for a long time, not moving his eyes away. A secret letter from Dongqing. The lost 3 cities of Shangyu have returned. Teacher should be very pleased. Lu Zheng smiled. There was still green stubble on the side of his lips, and his eyes were bruised and swollen. He looked a few years older than his actual age. The boy's servant let out a short "ah" and asked, "Teacher, is what you said true?" Lu Zheng raised his hand and adjusted the cloak draped over his shoulders. "Of course it's true. Your teacher can't slack off either." Light another lamp. Although he said that he disliked Shui, Lu Zheng had been secretly observing him. Seeing that the successive setbacks had slowly worn away Shui's edges and arrogance, Lu Zheng reluctantly agreed to become an official. As soon as he became an official, he did everything he could to help Shui find a peaceful place to live. Half of Jiangzhou. Next, it was time to move steadily and further expand his power. Shui was good in every aspect, except for one thing that gave him a headache. His power was still too weak, and his personnel structure was seriously biased. If he couldn't find someone to share his workload, Lu Zheng suspected that he would overwork himself to death. Zhongzhao, Binzhou. Little Emperor, you've gone too far. Why don't we just rebel against him? The man in the black robe slammed the short table heavily. The dull thud hit the hearts of the people present. Ever since the death of the former Empress Du, the emperor had become more and more obsessed with women. He had no interest in court affairs, even allowing relatives and eunuchs to kill loyal subjects. The aristocratic families watched coldly from the sidelines. At first, those involved were mostly commoner families and had little to do with their interests. Who knew that after 2 or 3 years, the eunuchs and relatives had become so powerful that they could shake the country? The two great powers worked together to deal with the aristocratic families, and even plotted several court coups in an attempt to seize power from them. The Nia family of Binzhou could be considered a first-rate aristocratic family in Zhongzhou. They had a long history and were naturally the first to bear the brunt. Their political enemies were closing in, but they couldn't keep retreating. What's there to rebel about? This isn't as simple as eating and drinking. There are many implications. We can't act recklessly. If we continue to endure, are we just going to let those rootless eunuchs and peasants bully us? The other party didn't say anything. After a while. This matter still needs to be discussed with father and the elders. Second brother, don't act rashly. The man called second brother frowned and swallowed his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "All right, I understand." Because of the incompetent ruler and the demon empress, there were more and more uprisings in Zhongzhou. Until the coup of the eunuchs and relatives conspiring to kill the aristocratic families was exposed, Zhongzhou was no longer a country. The nobles supported by the aristocratic families revolted. Chapter 953. The world situation was treacherous. Jiang Pengji didn't have the time to care about other families' affairs. She focused on guarding her own territory. After forcing the northern borderline soldiers to retreat, she ordered Fu Wang to hang the second prince on the city wall for 8 hours every day. The second prince hung a wooden plate around his neck with the words, "Prince of the Northern Borderline," written on it. Anyone who passed by the city gate could see the content on the wooden plate. She used this method to retaliate for the humiliation the Northern Borderline inflicted on Dongqing and Jiang Pengji. To prevent the second prince from freezing or dying of illness, Jiang Pengji prepared a doctor with excellent medical skills and enough clothes to keep him warm. "Don't worry, I will let you live well until the day I go to war." She felt that she had the potential to be a vicious supporting female character. The second prince struggled and cursed her in a hoarse voice. "Lu Shi, how dare you treat me like this? When the Northern Borderline army arrives, you will die a horrible death." "I don't know if I will die a horrible death, but you will definitely die a horrible death. If you have the guts, bite your tongue and commit suicide." Looking at the second prince's frightened eyes, he was the living embodiment of a male protagonist who was bullied by a vicious supporting female character. Jiang Pengji's heart was filled with malice. Bah! She couldn't be led astray by the streamer. For some reason, the streamer liked to pair up the scholars and generals under Jiang Pengji. He even wrote a lot of flirtatious jokes. She was bored and watched to kill time. The more she watched, the worse it got. She felt like she was poisoned. Every time she saw Fu Wang, Li Yun, Qiguan Rang, or Feng Zhen come closer, the jokes from the audience automatically appeared in her mind. The adults didn't escape. Even Feng Yi and Chengsheng, who were far away in Wanzhou, were not spared. However, Host V, don't make up stories about Zixiao. Do whatever you want. Look, she's a good lord who loves her subordinates. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but give herself a thumbs up. The streaming room was jubilant and relaxed, but reality was not optimistic. When the Northern Borderline received news of the second prince being captured and humiliated, the king was furious and the imperial court was shaken. "I don't have such an unfilial son. Get lost. Do you really think I don't know that all of you are coveting my throne?" Upon receiving the news, the king of the Northern Borderline was so angry that he fainted. He seemed to have aged a few years after he woke up. Looking at his son who was surrounding his bed, he was so angry that his fingers were trembling. He thought that the reason why the second prince volunteered to guard the 3 cities of Shangyu was because of his filial piety, but he never thought that this unfilial son had other plans. You all want to die alone, don't you? He had never expected that his second son would be able to raise an army of 20,000 right under his nose. If his second son hadn't been so greedy as to steal Lu Shi's granary and turned around to force him to abdicate, wouldn't he have been dead by now? As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, he could not help but start a series of conspiracy theories. At this moment, he was not sad that his son had fallen into the hands of the enemy and suffered inhumane treatment. Instead, he was secretly happy. His second son, who wielded 20,000 troops, was simply a thorn in his side. Now that it had been removed, he felt much better. The king of the northern borderline took the opportunity to harshly beat his remaining 8 sons. After a few violent bouts of illness, his body was on the verge of collapse. The second prince's actions this time crossed the line. The king of the northern borderline was terrified and guarded against his sons as if they were thieves. Royal father, I don't dare. Please don't be angry and take care of yourself. The princes fought to be the first to express their opinions, their faces full of fear. Their acting skills were superb. It would be a waste if they were not given an Oscar. Faced with the king of the northern borderline's harsh words, it did not matter what the other princes thought, but they had to put on the appearance of filial piety. The 4th prince was scolded harshly, but he was secretly overjoyed. It was all because of him that the second prince had fallen to such a state. He knew that the second prince had a lot of private soldiers, but he did not expect it to be to this extent. A total of 20,000 elites. If the other party directly forced him to abdicate, the throne would definitely belong to him. How could he even have a chance? Mr. Sun, you have a divine foresight. You have calculated every possibility. You are really the reincarnation of Prime Minister Huangfu. Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty had destroyed the Qiangu tribe's ambition to rule the Central Plains. To them, Prime Minister Huangfu was the most intelligent person. The 4th prince compared Sun Wen to him, which showed how much he admired him. Your Highness, you flatter me. Although he was speaking modestly, Sun Wen actually accepted the 4th prince's bow. The 4th prince said, Sir, although the second prince has been eliminated, there are still others eyeing him. Sir, you have to help me. Don't worry, Your Highness. I have a plan to eliminate the 1st prince. The 4th prince suddenly thought of the trick that Sun Wen asked him to do. He asked the 1st prince's men to kill the 2nd prince's patrolling soldiers, which led to the 2nd prince's radical attack on the granary. If they were to frame him, sir, you mean, Sun Wen said with a smile, although they are the 2nd prince's private soldiers, they are still the elites of the northern borderline. Now, they have been swallowed by Lu Shi without saying a word. Not only did it damage the northern borderline's reputation, but it also greatly damaged the morale of the northern borderline and weakened their armed forces. When the king's anger subsides, he will be distressed by the loss of 20,000. Your Highness, why don't you choose a good time to mention this matter? If the king knew that the 1st prince is an insider and has been secretly harming the other princes, I don't know how sad and disappointed he would be. The 4th prince's heart skipped a beat and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Sir, you are right. Without the 2nd prince, there was still the 1st prince of noble birth. As long as the 1st prince was eliminated, it would be much easier to deal with the other brothers. Under Sun Wen's instigation, the princes of the northern borderline fought fiercely. A month later, the king of the northern borderline fainted from anger again. The 1st prince was stunned by the flying pot. Even if he opened his mouth wide, he could not defend himself. The king of the northern borderline was already on guard against his sons. He simply took the opportunity to cripple his eldest son. In just 2 months, his eldest son was crippled, and his second son was crippled by Jiang Pengji. Before he could catch his breath, he appointed Wu Liba, the wise man of the northern borderline, as an envoy to Dongqing. It seemed like he wanted an explanation, but in fact, it was for an alliance and reconciliation. The current northern borderline could not withstand a large-scale war. He had to think of a way to scare Jiang Pengji so that she would not dare to send troops to the northern borderline. As long as these 2 years passed and the northern borderline recovered a little, he could find Jiang Pengji to settle this blood debt. He had crippled one of his sons and killed 20,000 of his elites. Lu Shi must pay with his blood. Wu Liba carried a heavy responsibility and planned to use his glib tongue to persuade Jiang Pengji. Oh. A gift from the magistrate of Liuzhou? In order to regain the trust of the king of the northern borderline, Wu Liba took the initiative to undertake the heavy responsibility of being an envoy. Along the way, he made various assumptions and countermeasures. Chapter 954. My lord, even if we want to go to war with the northern borderline, it can't be now. Knowing what Jiang Pengji had given Wu Liba, Qiguan Rang almost broke his precious fan. Wenjing, what are you afraid of? The northern borderline is the one who doesn't want war now. The initiative is with us, and it's not up to them to decide. If Wu Liba can't take it anymore, he can just turn around and leave. Feng didn't mind blowing things up. He grinned and gulped down a mouthful of sake. His salary wasn't low. What kind of good wine couldn't he buy? However, Feng Zhen liked to freeload a little from each house. Even if it was unadulterated wine, he enjoyed it. Among all the houses, he liked his lord's wine the most. It tasted more mellow than ordinary liquors. Qiguan Rang glared at Feng Zhen. He was right. It must be this wastrel who instigated his lord to cause trouble. Feng Zhen received Qiguan Rang's gaze and secretly shrugged. He smiled, revealing his white teeth. He had an expression that said, "What can you do to me?" How could Qiguan Rang not know what kind of person his lord was? His lord was a troublemaker. She couldn't settle down, so why would she need others to instigate her to cause trouble? At most, he gave some suggestions. He could only be considered an accomplice. Jiang Pengji also helped Feng Zhen. She said, they've been bullied by the northern borderline. They're just taking the opportunity to get back at them. Even if I give them 8 or 10, they'll still have to endure it, not to mention one. Wenjing, do you think the wise man from the northern borderline can guess the meaning behind it? With his lord's support, Feng Zhen proudly puffed out his chest. Qiguan Rang was so angry that his molars were itching. It was one thing to instigate his lord to stir up trouble, but this wastrel was being arrogant. Qiguan Rang's expression was gloomy. The audience laughed and made up stories about the two of them. Jiang Pengji was overjoyed. She secretly laughed until her stomach hurt. On the other side, Wu Liba couldn't laugh anymore. Oh. A gift from the governor of Liuzhou? When Wu Liba heard the news, he changed his mind. He was sure that Jiang Pengji had admitted defeat. She was using a gift to express her kindness. Wu Liba didn't show it on his face, but he smiled in his heart. He said, quickly, present the gift. The gift was placed in a delicately shaped wooden box. There were exquisite and beautiful patterns around the box. It looked like a work of art. Seeing this, Wu Liba felt even more assured. He personally opened the box, and as soon as he lifted it a little, he smelled the stench of blood and decay. Wu Liba's expression changed. When he opened the lid and saw what was inside, his face turned ashen. Inside the mirror box was a set of exquisite glass headgear and a transparent bowl. Inside the bowl was a piece of rotten meat covered in coagulated blood. If it was a few years ago, such a set of glass headwear could be sold at the high price of hundreds of thousands of strings of coins in the northern borderline. Now, it was so widespread and cheap that one set was not enough. With Wu Liba's knowledge, the piece of meat in the transparent bowl was clearly a human tongue. Wu Liba was praised as the sage of the northern borderline. Naturally, there was nothing to criticize about his intelligence. In an instant, he understood the meaning of the brocade box. Glass headwear? Everyone in the northern borderline knew that Wu Liba's wife was the young mistress of the northern borderline trading company. She loved to chase after luxury goods. A few years ago, when the colored glass of the heavenly palace appeared out of nowhere, Wu Liba's wife bought more than 10 sets. This act was talked about by the rich ladies of the northern borderline. Everyone thought that the colored glass of the heavenly palace was really expensive, but they didn't know that it was a scam. The Northern Borderline Trading Company Alliance and the rich ladies of the Northern Borderline were cheated of more than 20 million strings of coins by Gu Xian. Among them, Wu Liba's wife's family was the leader of the trading company. Because of this, they were unable to recover. Wu Liba lost the support of the Yu family, and his position in the Northern Borderline was greatly affected. Even Wu Liba's political enemy, Harun Cha, often used this to mock him. The dignified sage of the northern borderline was schemed against by a businessman. Wouldn't he laugh his head off? Therefore, the colored glass of the heavenly palace had always been an indescribable pain in Wu Liba's heart. He hated to see this deceitful thing. As for the tongue, if a person's tongue was cut off, they couldn't speak. Wu Liba's visit to Dongqing was just to talk. Now, he was hinting to him not to talk. Wasn't this a slap in the face? Of course, this was not the end. Lu Shi, I will return the humiliation you have suffered today double in the future, Wu Liba said with a serious expression. He waved his hand. Take it out and throw it away. Wu Liba suppressed his anger. Just as he was about to calm the raging flames in his heart, he suddenly saw something else in the brocade box from the corner of his eye. Wait, come back. He used his fingers to pick up the piece of paper that was pressed under the tongue and carefully unfolded it. After reading it, his anger surged and his vision flickered. I think your Prince Era is too noisy, so I specially sent it back, Lu Shi. This tongue actually belonged to the second prince. Wu Liba didn't have the time to care about the title, Prince Era. He only wanted to know who the owner of this tongue was. Lu Shi. Lu Shi. How dare you humiliate us like this? Wu Liba was so angry that his blood pressure soared. His cheeks were flushed red, then suddenly turned purple. Fortunately, Wu Liba's psychological endurance was strong. His vision flickered for a while and he actually recovered. Guards, Wu Liba panted heavily. His eyes were terrifyingly bloodshot. According to my orders, send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it back to Magistrate Lu. This fulfills the Central Plains custom of courtesy demands reciprocity. If it wasn't for the bigger picture, Wu Liba also wanted to use disgusting methods to disgust Jiang Pengji. However, as Feng Zhen had said, the main battle power was in Jiang Pengji's hands. The northern borderline had to serve them well. It wasn't that the northern borderline couldn't afford to fight, but the price of starting a war now was too high. Jiang Pengji received the generous gift from Wu Liba. She smiled and squinted her eyes. She liked it when her enemies couldn't do anything to her. In the end, they still had to flatter her, indulge her, and tolerate her. Lo Cg Lianmeng, sigh. The northern borderline is so unlucky. Why did they have to meet the streamer? Gui Kai Guofengxiu, if this was in a novel, the streamer would definitely be the top villain boss? Pia Pia Weong, that's really hopeless. How big does the halo of the main character have to be? How strong does the immortal body have to be to defeat the Demon King? Elan Yugu, the halo. It has to be at least 100 million in diameter, right? Poor Wu Liba. He doesn't have the halo of the main character, but he has taken on the task of defeating the Demon King. He's definitely going to be tortured. General Wu Liba, how have you been all these years since we parted ways in Shangjing? Jiang Pengji and Wu Liba had met once. At that time, he was high-spirited and arrogant. He forced Jiang Pengji to swallow the resentment in her heart. Now, the situation was reversed. She, who was dressed in white, had become a vassal who ruled over a region. The domineering and arrogant Wu Liba had to respect her mood and carefully flatter her. Indeed, the wheel of fortune had turned. A trace of astonishment flashed in Wu Liba's eyes. He was shocked by Jiang Pengji's familiarity and even more surprised by her kindness. He had met Lu Shi before. Wu Liba couldn't remember the trivial matter from that time. Chapter 955. That year at Mount Ji's hot spring in Shangjing, Jiang Pengji stood up for Feng Jin, but Wu Liba stood up to stop her at the critical moment. However, with Jiang Pengji's bad temper, how could she let it go so easily? In front of Wu Liba, she chopped off the arm of the instigator from the northern borderline and slapped his face in front of everyone. Wu Liba might still remember the incident, but how could he remember that the arrogant youth was the current Jiang Pengji? He carefully considered Jiang Pengji's words and chose a vague answer. I've been living well these past few years. Thank you for your concern, Governor Lu. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, as long as you're doing well. She didn't dare to boast about other things, but when it came to holding grudges, if she was the second best, no one would dare to be the first. Back then, at Ji Shan's hot spring, Jiang Pengji wanted to press Wu Liba to the ground and give him a good beating. She wanted to punch his face. She had always remembered this debt. In the past, due to the circumstances, she could only watch as Wu Liba was arrogant and despotic. Now that the tables had turned, it was her turn to control the situation. Wu Liba saw that Jiang Pengji had a smile on her face and was concerned about his well-being. She did not seem to have any ill intentions. He was puzzled. He even doubted whether it was Jiang Pengji's own intention to give him a gift. Could it be that her subordinates had done it behind her back? If that was the case, it proved that Jiang Pengji's attitude towards the northern borderline was still neutral. There should be a possibility of persuasion. Thinking of this, Wu Liba secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The expression on his face also became lighter. As long as there was a chance, everything could be discussed. What he didn't know was that Jiang Pengji looked easy to talk to, but it was only because of her excellent acting skills. As the leader of a group of actresses, she must be the best of the best, the one who won all the Oscars. Wu Liba was organizing his thoughts when Jiang Pengji interrupted him warmly and invited him to have a meal together. Even if Wu Liba did not pay much attention to it, he knew that Wanzhou's gourmet house was famous for its delicacies. Gourmet house was established by Jiang Pengji. As you wish. He swallowed the words he was about to say. When the delicacies were served, the aroma of the meat made him salivate, and his appetite was greatly stimulated. Just the smell alone was enough to stir one's appetite. General Wu Liba was born in the northern borderline and is a man of the grasslands. He should be used to eating horse meat, right? Jiang Pengji smiled and ordered someone to pour wine for him. Horse meat? Wu Liba took a bite. He did not know how the chef handled the meat, but it melted in his mouth, and the rich fragrance of the meat spread on the tip of his tongue. Even someone like Wu Liba, who did not care about his appetite, could not help but take a few more bites. It's a rare delicacy. Governor Lu, you're the lucky one. I'm afraid I don't have the fortune to enjoy it. It was indeed delicious. The meat was chewy and juicy. Based on Wu Liba's experience, this horse meat was definitely from a high-quality horse. However, the stud farm in Dongqing was controlled by the Meng family in Sangzhou. The master of the Meng family had also made it clear that he and Lu Shi had an irreconcilable feud. It was absolutely impossible for him to provide horses to Lu Shi. In other words, Lu Shi's horses were like gold ingots. Why would he slaughter them for food? In an instant, various thoughts flashed through his mind. For some reason, Wu Liba had an ominous feeling. General Wu Liba, how does it taste? Jiang Pengji asked him with a smile. Wu Liba said, the meat is chewy and delicious. I'm afraid it's a good colt. Jiang Pengji replied readily, that's natural. It's an excellent colt from the northern borderline. I was afraid that General Wu Liba would not be used to it, so I specially sent someone to the warhorse camp to slaughter an injured horse. Although it's an injured horse, it's healthy and has a good bloodline. It's also a good horse. She spoke naturally. The more Wu Liba listened, the darker his face became. The fragrance of the meat in his mouth seemed to have become poisonous, making it hard for him to swallow. The warhorse was brought by the second prince. Lu Shi purposely slaughtered a good colt from the northern borderline to entertain him. His evil intentions were clear. A stern look flashed in Wu Liba's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Jiang Pengji asked, "Why aren't you eating?" He replied, "I'm old and my teeth are loose. I'm afraid I can't eat much. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Governor Lu's good intentions." Wu Liba put the food aside and sat upright. "I heard that my master's second son offended Governor Lu." Jiang Pengji continued to smile. "Didn't you see General Wu Liba when he entered the city?" Wu Liba was surprised. He did not know what she meant. Jiang Pengji continued, "I forgot. With my memory, I'm always forgetful. In order to welcome General Wu Liba, I thought about it day and night, but I couldn't find a good gift. Considering that Prince Era missed his hometown, I allowed a part of his body to return. However, his injuries were severe. If his limbs were broken, he wouldn't live long, so I could only cut off his tongue. Prince Era's tongue was twisted a while ago. He's still recuperating, so I didn't hang him on the city wall to dry these few days." The second prince worked 8 hours a day. It was quite tiring. Now that the second prince's mouth was injured, Jiang Pengji naturally would not force him to work with his injuries. Wu Liba suddenly widened his eagle eyes. His eyes were filled with rage and ruthlessness. "Governor Lu." Jiang Pengji lifted her eyelids lazily and said, "Yes, I'm listening." Wu Liba said, "Governor Lu, do you really have to be so ruthless?" Jiang Pengji smiled. "Ruthless? I don't think it's ruthless. Your prince from the north borderline brought 20,000 to 30,000 troops to attack Chongzhou. He tried to steal rations and burn down the granaries. I would like to ask, is this not ruthless? Once the 3 granaries of Chao Wu, Lijiang, and Sang Mo are destroyed, the 100,000 elites in Chongzhou will starve to death. To put it bluntly, your lord allows his son to fool around and doesn't teach him to not steal. Don't blame me for teaching him how to be a man. General Wu Liba, are you here to plead on his behalf? 100,000 elites? 3 granaries could feed 100,000 elite soldiers? Wu Liba extracted important information from Jiang Pengji's words. His face turned ghastly pale. Jiang Pengji's words were not polite at all. After careful consideration, it was extremely frightening. It was a clear threat. Wu Liba's heart raced. His mind was full of thoughts, but he remained unmoved on the surface. Governor Lu, you've misunderstood. When my lord learned of this, he was furious. The second prince privately recruited 20,000 troops and was suspected of having disloyal intentions. Speaking of which, Governor Lu's action helped my lord to clean up his mess and at the same time, prevented more conflicts. Wu Liba said calmly, the north borderline and Dongqing are in-laws. The 2 countries coexist peacefully. The second prince tried to incite a war between the 2 countries. It was a move that hurt his heart. It is the second prince's good fortune that Governor Lu taught him a lesson. My lord sent me here, firstly to explain, and secondly for the people at the border. I didn't expect General Wu Liba to be such a righteous person. Wu Liba saw Jiang Pengji admit it shamelessly. He almost vomited blood. Chapter 956. Ah, you have to pay for what you've done. It hurts to slap yourself in the face. Today's single chapter was to explain what the author had posted 2 days ago. Of course, it had already been deleted to avoid causing a greater impact. Previously, Shitake had seen in the author's group chat that Bao Zi had plagiarized an idea starting with AW, and that it even involved an old history from several years ago. As for what old history it was, Shitake did not want to talk about it, for fear that it would only make things more troublesome. What he wanted to say was that it was Shirgu's fault for not seeking confirmation from the other party, Bao. Without seeing concrete evidence, she decided on the matter on her own. Of course, it was also because they didn't clear up the past. Shitake's inherent impression of Bao was in a negative state, and her preconceived judgment was wrong. On Monday, the editor knocked on the mushroom, only then did he realize what a stupid thing he had done. According to the editor, a screenshot of an insignificant author like me having something to say is even more popular than the two parties involved arguing. I'm scared to death. Therefore, Bao found Shitake and took out a screenshot of the evidence. The content of the screenshot was hard to say, for fear of charging money for taking up too much space. With Shitake's 250 IQ, he could prove Bao's innocence. His conclusion was that Shitake had been too impulsive and made a mistake. His body moved faster than his brain. Now, he was sincerely apologizing for the content that the author had something to say, hoping to redeem the damage that his previous words had done to Bao. Also, the waters in your circle are too deep. In the future, I will just be an onlooker. At the very least, I will think before doing anything. Smiley face angle, Xianggu had originally intended to limit it to 400 words, but she didn't expect that the VIP would require at least 1,000 words. This put Xianggu in a difficult position. I'm afraid that not many readers will be able to read it if it's a public chapter. It won't make much of a difference if it's a standalone chapter. It's better to publish it in the VIP section so that more readers can read it. However, if he wrote 1,000 words and sent it out, he would feel like he was trying to scam people. Thus, he decided to make a small sum of money as compensation. Foreign, Zixiao, look at me, a familiar voice drifted into his ears, making him itch as if a feather was gently tickling his heart. Wei Ci struggled to open his eyes. The glaring sunlight made him frown uncomfortably. Before he could see his surroundings clearly, his cheeks felt moist. Huh, are you still awake? Changsheng, help him wash his face. Wei Ci subconsciously raised his hand and touched his face. It was covered in sticky saliva. Before he could react, a fair and round face appeared in front of him. Changsheng, who was more than 8 months old, could already babble. She held Wei Ci's face with both hands, opened her mouth and bit the tip of his nose. Wei Ci could not help but laugh. He raised his arms and hugged Changsheng. His fair fingertips pointed at her little nose. Your nose is dirty. If you're hungry, look for the wet nurse. Changsheng chuckled and stretched out her 2 snow-white arms towards Wei Ci restlessly. Sigh. Children are full of energy and mischievous. They're too naughty, Jiang Pengji lamented. Isn't it because my lord always indulges her? That's not good. It's precisely because Changsheng is young that the lord has to educate him well. Jiang Pengji smiled. Although I like children, I don't like to teach them. Wei Ci muttered to himself, that's right, the lord herself likes to make a fuss, how can she raise the child? Don't raise a good-for-nothing second-generation ancestor. Fortunately, she has Zixiao. In the future, you will be her tutor. Yes, you will be the only tutor. Wei Ci said disapprovingly, how can this be? Ci's skills are not good enough, I'm afraid I won't be able to take on heavy responsibilities. Tutors and teachers are different. Other teachers teach knowledge, but you, as the tutor, teach her how to be a person. Wei Ci did not understand. Was there a difference? Of course there was. In the future Jiang dynasty, the current empress was called Huichang. As everyone knew, the empress of the royal family was single. As the times developed, the people and the royal family, who were far away from the center of power and content with being a mascot, were constantly getting closer. As they got closer, there was more gossip. The people were very curious about one thing. The reporter asked, it said that the women of the royal family will get pregnant if they have feelings. Is this true? Huichang said, reap what you sow? No, it's fake. The reporter asked, so, in fact, there really are royal husbands? Huichang said, the title of royal husband is really. You must have read a lot of romance novels. Although there are no royal husbands in the royal family, there has always been a profession that has been passed down from generation to generation. Every emperor has a royal husband. The reporter asked, "What?" Hui Chang said, "Tutor of the crown princess." The people were shocked. Chapter 957. Wu Liba said calmly, "Ever since I ascended the throne, I have been restless. After many years of hard work, the people of the northern borderline were able to live a prosperous life. After that, my lord reluctantly married his beloved daughter, Princess Enchanting, to the former emperor's second son. They became in-laws, hoping that the two countries could coexist peacefully. All these actions are just to appease the old grudges between the two countries, so that the people of the two countries can live in peace." Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows slightly. She looked at Wu Liba with a spurious smile. Taking words out of context and distorting the truth were vividly displayed by the other party. In Wu Liba's mouth, the ambitious king of the northern borderline was not only a wise and brilliant ruler, but also an ambassador of peace. Wu Liba did not even have the slightest idea what kind of person his king was. "You're really good at distorting the truth. Don't you want any face at all?" Jiang Pengji did not speak, so Wu Liba continued, "My lord heard that the second prince used automatic troops and offended the borders of Chongzhou. He was worried day and night and could not sleep well. If war broke out, not only would the people of the northern borderline suffer, the people of Chongzhou would also have to leave their homes and become homeless. My lord thought of this matter and took pity on the suffering of the common people of the two places. He specially sent an envoy, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding and restore friendship." Wu Liba spoke in a righteous and awe-inspiring manner. The viewers in the live streaming room were so angry that they wanted to explode on the spot. Heng Yu, other things aside, Wu Liba's shamelessness is on par with our streamer. Meng Pang Bao Bao, Bulsh *T. My streamer is shameless, that's called cunning and wise. Wu Liba is shameless, that's really shameless. Huang Shaoliaozwa Guren, what a typical liar. Doesn't this old man's conscience hurt? Didn't he know how the people in the 3 cities of Shangyu had been living over the past few years? Didn't the streamer say that because the 3 cities of Shangyu are located at the border of the two countries, their trade is good and they are one of the few prosperous cities in Chongzhou? Ever since it was robbed by those bastards from the northern borderline, he couldn't see what it had become. Jiang Pengji had used the 3 cities of Shangyu as a military stronghold and a springboard to attack the northern borderline. It was not only because of strategic military considerations, but also because the 3 cities had been severely damaged. If it were to be developed again, it was unknown how much effort, manpower, and financial resources would be needed. The 3 cities were basically 3 wastelands that harbored evil and accommodated the bandits and criminals of the northern border. Wasn't it the northern borderline's fault that the originally prosperous city had turned into such a ghastly state? Gu Meng Meng, that's right, Wu Liba is really disgusting. Let me make an analogy. It's as ironic as the Japanese who massacred the Chinese people during the war holding the World Peace Prize trophy. Anyone had the right to say that, but not Wu Liba, the barbarian from the northern borderline. Jiao Teng, who asked Wu Liba to be the envoy sent by the northern borderline? Of course, he had to put gold on his face. Could it be that he had to tell the truth and admit that the king of the northern borderline was a bloodthirsty and warlike butcher? It was like a Japanese saying that he was a Japanese. It was impossible. Jiang Pengji raised her eyelids lazily and sneered. Become friends again? That's right. I hope that Lu Prefecture Magistrate will refrain from fighting for the sake of the people of the two regions. Wu Liba tried to appeal to his emotions. Wu Liba had learned from the Han culture of the Central Plains and liked to use peaceful means before resorting to force. It would be best if he could make Jiang Pengji agree to form an alliance by using her feelings. If the other party refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit and refused to agree, Wu Liba had other ways to deal with it. Jiang Pengji laughed involuntarily. What if I'm not willing? No matter how extravagant General Wu Liba's words were, the 3 cities of Shangyu had been in the hands of the Northern Army for nearly 20 years, and countless Han people had died. Was this the peace that the Northern Army's king had hoped for? I'm afraid it's hard to convince him. Wu Liba's expression did not change, but his eyes became sharper. He said, although I live in the northern border, I know that the Lu prefecture overseer once gathered with the other 22 feudal vassals at the Huang River to form an alliance. Since then, the feudal vassals of Dongqing had been independent and only cared about their own interests. Does the governor of Liuzhou know that it is lonely at the top? Now that you are in a high position, who knows how many pairs of eyes are staring at you in the dark? This is a situation where tigers and wolves are surrounding you. If you let your emotions get the better of you and start a war between the two sides, no matter if Lu Prefecture's magistrate wins or loses, his vitality will be greatly damaged. When the sandpiper and the clam fight, the one who benefits in the end is the fisherman. Ceremony did not work, so they could only use troops. Wu Liba explained the key benefits and tried to persuade Jiang Pengji. He wasn't spouting nonsense. Jiang Pengji was the most powerful feudal vassal in Dongqing. If she started a war with the northern border, regardless of the outcome, her vitality would be greatly damaged. By then, who knew how many forces would bully her? If the enemy took advantage of the stalemate between her and the northern border and directly sent troops to attack both sides, what would happen? Lo Siji Lianmeng, what Wu Liba said makes some sense, but did he forget something? Jiang Pengji laughed and said, General Wu Liba, have you heard of a certain saying of the Han people? What saying? Those who are not of our race will surely have a different heart. Wu Liba's face suddenly turned green. Jiang Pengji sneered and said, if I start a war with the northern border, regardless of the outcome, my name will surely go down in history. Among the feudal vassals, as long as they have a bit of courage and don't want to go down in history, who would dare to take advantage of the situation? How can this be understood by the uncivilized barbarians of the wilderness? She mocked Wu Liba as an uncivilized barbarian in front of him. This humiliation was undoubtedly a harsh slap to the other party's face. It was intolerable. Wu Liba slammed the table and stood up. His entire face had turned green. He could see that Jiang Pengji was determined to start a war. She was just toying with him. Wu Liba had been famous for a long time. When had he ever suffered such humiliation? The guards who heard the commotion swarmed in. One group stood in front of Jiang Pengji, separating her and Wu Liba. The other group surrounded Wu Liba. Jiang Pengji said, I can hear you. You don't have to be so loud. I forgot to mention that we don't have the habit of not killing envoys in a war between two armies. General Wu Liba, please take it easy. If you really provoke me, you won't be able to return alive. After finishing her words, Jiang Pengji sneered and left. Wu Liba's mood had gone through ups and downs. He seemed to have aged a lot. Of course, Jiang Pengji didn't kill him. Instead, she packed him and the people he brought with him and threw them out. I'm afraid the war at the beginning of spring is unavoidable. Why? Is there anything in this world that you, Feng Langzi, are afraid of? Feng Zhen laughed. The time, place, and people are all present. Of course I'm not afraid. On the contrary, if I miss this opportunity, I'm afraid I'll become a sinner for all eternity. The Central Plains was divided. The foreign tribes were becoming more and more of a threat to the Han family. If they didn't take the opportunity to completely subdue them, when they made a comeback, it would be hell for the human world. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan lightly and smiled. That's what I was thinking. Wu Liba was chased away by Jiang Pengji. The royal court of the northern borderline was furious. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that he almost had a stroke. She doesn't know what's good for him. I'll let him know what's good for him. Sun Wen calculated the amount of hanshi powder that the king had recently consumed and the frequency of his rage. He felt that he could still put in more effort. Chapter 958. With the help of the fourth prince, Sun Wen successfully tricked the second prince and crippled the first prince. After that, he set his sights on the sixth prince. The fourth prince frowned. The sixth prince's mother is of noble status and his maternal family is powerful. Why did he choose to deal with him first? Sun Wen said with a smile, "Forgive me for being disrespectful, but the king has been showing signs of aging recently. His anger has caused his health to deteriorate. If anything were to happen to him, the sixth prince could use the power of his mother's clan to ascend the throne. If that's the case, wouldn't all of our schemes end up benefiting him instead?" Apart from the sixth prince, the rest of the prince's forces were uneven. Only the fourth prince had a chance to fight. When the fourth prince heard Sun Wen speak of the king of the northern borderline in such a manner, he felt slightly uncomfortable. However, his inner ambition and thirst for power overwhelmed his father-son bond, allowing him to successfully ignore this little discomfort. The fourth prince bowed deeply and asked sincerely, "Please teach me." Sun Wen stroked his beard and smiled. "Your Highness, come closer." The two of them whispered to each other and discussed for a while. The fourth prince's eyes became brighter and brighter. A few days later, Sun Wen once again used a series of tricks. Not only did he trick the sixth prince, but he also made the king of the northern borderline fall ill from anger. "Father, I really didn't." "You must believe me," the sixth prince cried like a man in tears. He had put up 1,000 defenses, but he still fell for his brother's evil scheme. "Father, someone must be framing me. I was raised by you personally. How could I do such a disgraceful thing?" The sixth prince knelt on the ground and cried. In the end, all he got was a sentence filled with endless anger. "Get lost." Not only did the king of the northern borderline not calm down, he was so angry that he wanted to kill his son. There was no other reason. This son actually took advantage of the time when he was sick and bedridden to hug his beloved beauty and clap for love on the ground. Listening to the conversation between the adulterous couple, he was so angry that he was about to ascend to heaven. It was popular in the northern borderline to transfer marriage. It referred to the marriage of a woman to her husband's brother, uncle, nephew, or the son of her husband with another woman after the death of her husband. If the king of the northern borderline died, his son would have the right to inherit his wives and concubines. But now, he was not dead yet. His son and his stepmother were clapping for love, and they were still oblivious in front of his sickbed. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that his condition worsened and he showed symptoms of temporary paralysis. The sixth prince, who had been caught, cried and wept, but he still could not stop the king of the northern borderline's killing intent. In order to survive, the sixth prince could only escape from the imperial court with the help of his mother's clan. He fled back to his fief and recruited soldiers. After a while, the sixth prince's attendant committed suicide and revealed that the sixth prince had been framed. After a series of messy investigations, the seventh and eighth princes turned out to be the masterminds. The king of the northern borderline could no longer be angry. He only felt his heart turn cold. The seventh and eighth princes cursed him with offerings, and he magnanimously forgave them. He had never imagined that his two sons were far more heartless and cruel than he had imagined. They had actually schemed against his other brothers in secret. Did they think that the throne would fall into their hands just because their brothers died? The seventh prince was close to the northern borderline's business. He had money and connections. The eighth prince was good at dancing and had a glib tongue. He got along well with many nobles in the northern borderline. Come to think of it, there were indeed many people who said that the eighth prince was very capable. It was really scary to think about it. The seventh and eighth princes received the news that very night. They followed the sixth prince's footsteps and ran away before the king of the northern kingdom caught them. As soon as they ran away, the king of the northern borderline was even more certain of his judgment. There were only 4 princes left in the northern borderline. As for the remaining 5, the second prince was in the Lord's hands. The eldest prince was deposed. The 6th, 7th, and 8th princes ran away to their respective fiefdoms. The division of the northern borderline had been mostly completed. Now, only the finishing touches were left. Sigh. It's New Year's Eve again. I wonder how Lon is doing. The old man who stayed behind? Sun Wen missed his grandson. Did his grandson miss him? Before the end of the year, a special guest came to Chongzhou. It was Han Yu. Wenbin. Wei Ci almost couldn't react when he saw Han Yu. Zixiao. Han Yu was full of smiles. He stepped forward and greeted Wei Ci with his hands folded in front. Han Yu had shed the immaturity of his youth. He was a handsome young man in his mid-20s. He wore a high hat and a wide belt. Wei Ci and Han Yu were both disciples of Master Yuanjing. They had a good relationship in private. When old friends met, the two had endless things to talk about. Wei Ci was in high spirits and drank a few cups of sake. I really didn't expect Lu Lanting to be a woman. When I received the news that day, I almost thought I heard it wrong. In Han Yu's memory, Jiang Pengji was still a young boy who drove a group of horses along the banks of the Yishui River. Who would have thought that the bad boy who went upstream to wash his feet was now a female lord who dominated a region? The world made fools of people. Han Yu complained as he drank. He was not as cold as usual. Instead, he was a bit long-winded. Wei Ci smiled bitterly. Han Yu was not the only one who was shocked. All the students of Langyi Academy were shocked. The two chatted about all sorts of things. The topic was related to the general trend of the world. Looking at the current situation, Lu Lanting is determined to fight against the northern borderline. Wei Ci said, "The Lord has made up her mind. This battle is unavoidable. The northern borderline is a big threat. We have to get rid of it. Her temper is no different from before. If we fight against the northern borderline, we won't be able to take care of other places." Wei Ci frowned and asked, "Wenbin seems to be implying something?" Han Yu said, "The Meng family of Cangzhou has a deep grudge against Lu Lanting. How could they miss such a great opportunity? If it were any other feudal vassals, it was unlikely that they would take advantage of the situation. However, it was hard to say for the Meng family of Cangzhou." Wei Ci's face darkened. Han Yu had told him another piece of news. The Meng family of Cangzhou wants to form an alliance with Huang Song of Haozhou. Meng Zhan even proposed to give his adopted daughter to Huang Song as a concubine. Wei Ci frowned deeply. In his previous life, Huang Song and the Meng family had formed an alliance to fight against the other feudal vassals. Huang Song married Meng Zhan's daughter. The father-son-in-law pair seemed to be close, but in fact, they had their own agendas. After a series of battles and calculations, Huang Song finally annexed the Meng family's foundation. But in this life, Meng Zhan had never had a biological daughter. Instead, he had an adopted daughter. After all, Meng Zhan's first wife in his previous life was not Gu Zhen. Even though she's his adopted daughter, he's still willing to give her away as a concubine. Is Wenbin worried that Huang Song and the Meng family will join hands to harm my master? Han Yu said, "It's not impossible. As long as there were enough benefits, they could do anything. If forming an alliance with the Meng family could help Huang Song advance further, who wouldn't be willing to do such a profitable deal?" Wei Ci looked straight into Han Yu's eyes and asked, "Wenbin, are you here to urge Su Bei to form an alliance with my master?" He asked quite straightforwardly, and Han Yu did not beat around the bush. Of course. If the two families join hands, even if Huang Song and the Meng family are in cahoots with each other, we still have nothing to fear. When Han Yu arrived in Chongzhou, he did not go to see Jiang Pengji first. Instead, he bumped into Wei Ci to find out what was going on. Chapter 959. Huang Bogeo, I'll say it here today. If you let that Meng woman enter the mansion or even touch a finger of hers, then the fate between us as husband and wife will end. From now on, the bridge is the bridge, the road is the road, you and I have nothing to do with each other. Lady Qi pulled out the dagger at her waist and stabbed it into the table. Huang Song was so frightened that he knelt on the ground and didn't dare to move. The more he acted like this, the more sad and uncomfortable Lady Qi was, and tears welled up in her eyes. Madam, if you have something to say, let's talk it out. Don't draw your knife so easily. Huang Song felt a headache coming on. Looking at the shiny blade, he didn't dare to provoke Lady Qi. If you have something to say, then of course we should talk it out. But now, I have nothing to say to you. Lady Qi looked at Huang Song with slightly red eyes. Back then, because she liked him, she didn't mind his background and insisted on marrying him. Now that Huang Song was the prefecture overseer of Haozhou, he was much more powerful than her family. Even so, Lady Qi still had her own pride and persistence. The person she loved was Huang Song, who completely belonged to her. This Huang Song was her husband and the father of her child. If this person had a new lover and took another woman as a concubine, she would rather bear the pain and abandon him than share him with others. Madam, you can't just let this matter go. What do you think? All men in the world are like that. I'm the same. Madam Qi frowned and said angrily, what are you? You are also an ordinary man. Do you want to have a group of concubines? Huang Song was most afraid of this madam. He loved her and feared her at the same time. Seeing that she was angry, he quickly knelt behind her and massaged her shoulders and back. Madam, I didn't say that I must have a second woman, but it doesn't matter if I have one in name. Otherwise, the reputation of being a henpecked husband will spread. How bad it will be. I promise not to hurt that woman. Madam, do you still not believe me? Huang Song was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Before the Mengs proposed to send his adopted daughter, he had never thought of taking a concubine. He didn't even dare to look at the beauties that his subordinates offered him. The reason why he came up with the idea of taking a concubine was that it was profitable to cooperate with the Mengs. Wasn't it just an extra set of bowls and chopsticks and a courtyard for a woman to live in? How big of a deal was that? If he could take this opportunity to form an alliance with the Meng family, Huang Songshao had been longing for the Meng's horse farm in Sangzhou for a long time. He had never imagined that his wife would be so angry that she would even bring up the matter of separation. Huang Song was so frightened that his legs went soft. I believe you. Huang Song's face lit up. Lady Qi sneered and added, but I don't believe you. Huang Song was dumbfounded. Madam, what do you mean? Madam Qi continued to sneer. If you want to take in a concubine, then can I raise a gigolo? Huang Song said, Madam, how can this be the same? Madam Qi said angrily. She held the dagger to Huang Song's nose and roared, how can it be different? Do you think I, Qi Chaolan, can't do what you, Uncle Huang, did? Lu Shi was able to become a marquis as a woman, and I have 3,000 elites under my command. Can't I do the same and start from scratch? When I become a marquis, why can't I have 3 husbands and 4 maids and keep a house full of gigolos? Huang Bogeo, I have the support of my maternal brothers, and I have a famous master. I have learned the art of war from my father since I was a child. If it weren't for the limitation of being a woman, would have joined the army by now. Do you really think that I am a woman guarding my own backyard? Do you think I can do it or not? Madam Qi's aura instantly soared to 2.8 meters. Huang Song sat obediently on his knees. Madam, I really didn't mean to touch that woman. I just wanted to take this opportunity to test the Meng family. They hold the lifeline of the horse farm, it's really for official business, and there's no love between a man and a woman. Huang Song hoped to persuade her with reason and emotion, but Madam Qi was very emotional and clear-headed, so she was not moved at all. She said mockingly, hearing you say that, you sound very aggrieved. Huang Song said, I dare not. I'm not aggrieved, my husband is a man of indomitable spirit, not a cocky rabbit. Huang Song's face was livid, as if he was constipated. He smiled bitterly and said, Madam, why do you say that? For the sake of the Meng family's interests, you have to reluctantly marry a woman from the Meng family. Isn't this a shady business of selling yourself? Huang Song was about to refute, but when he saw his wife's fierce expression, he didn't dare to say anything. Besides, the Meng family is a sly old fox. If you hang out with him, it's still unknown who will swallow who. Huang Song said timidly, "Madam, even if you don't believe me, you should believe in my group of advisors. How can they be easy to deal with?" Madam Chi snorted coldly, her expression cold. "In short, as long as I am alive, no second woman is allowed to live in my room or sleep in your bed. If you dare to have one, I will abdicate and wait for your letter to release my wife. I will wait for your, may Madam live for 1,000 years and get married again." When a man and a woman separated peacefully, the man would write a letter to release his wife to the woman, and at the end, he would write, "May Madam live for 1,000 years and get married again," to show his blessing. After that, Madam Chi swaggered away, leaving Huang Song with a headache. "Alas, Lanting has really made me suffer," Huang Song touched his forehead. When he had just told his wife that he wanted to take a concubine, Madam Chi had directly used violence and beaten him so badly that he couldn't fight back. The daughter of a tiger from a family of generals was really terrifying. With this kind of combat power, even 3 to 5 big men might not be able to control her. "It's all your fault." Although Madam Chi and he were of the same mind, he couldn't stop her from being infatuated with Lu Shi. A role model for women. A woman had become a mighty and all-powerful vassal in the north. She had seduced his wife to pick up the knives, spears, swords, and halberds that had been abandoned for several years and used them vigorously. After all, Madam Chi didn't play with these things after she got married. For the sake of her idol, she picked up martial arts and made great progress after some hard training. It wasn't that Huang Song didn't want to fight back against the domestic violence just now, but that he had no room to fight back at all. Lanting, you really made me suffer." Huang Song took the bronze mirror and looked at himself. The bruises on his face were obvious, and there was a big bump on his forehead. How could he face others? Looking at the rouge and makeup on the dressing table, Huang Song recalled the process of his wife putting on makeup and tried to use it to cover up the traces of domestic violence. A quarter of an hour passed. Looking at the ghost in the mirror, Huang Song almost vomited from disgust. After carelessly wiping off the rouge, Huang Song left home with a wretched look on his face. He was going to find a few strategists to have a good discussion. As soon as he went out, he bumped into Qingjing and Feng Ju, who had come to visit hand in hand. Huang Song was speechless. He was the Lord. He still needed to save face. Qingjing and Feng Ju were speechless. They had come at the wrong time. The Lord and the other two looked at each other, and the atmosphere was awkward for a moment. Feng Ju asked, "Lord, have you convinced the first madam?" Chapter 960. Feng Ju sighed. Although Qingjing frowned, he did not say anything. It was an expected result. Huang Song's wife was also a resourceful woman. She was different from other unmarried women. Their lord never avoided this madam when discussing matters. Sometimes, he would even listen to her suggestions, which showed how much he loved and respected her. Qingjing said, "In that case, we can only think of another way." The master of the Meng family was as cunning as a fox. He was ambitious and would do anything to achieve his goals. He was not an easy person to deal with. Rather than being on guard against his schemes in the future, it's better not to associate with him from the start. Huang Song frowned and said, "If we don't agree, won't we become enemies with the Meng family?" The Meng family of Tsangzhou was really not to be trifled with. Huang Song's wings were growing, but compared to the big shots like the Meng family of Tsangzhou, he was still a little inexperienced. If the two sides were to form an alliance, Huang Song would have to bear a certain amount of risk, but the benefits would definitely be great. If they rejected the alliance, it would be equivalent to pushing the Meng family into a position of opposition, creating an enemy for no reason. Now, he could only listen to what his two trusted advisors had to say. Qing Jing said, "Has my lord ever wondered why the Meng family would suddenly form an alliance with us at this critical juncture?" Huang Song shook his head. It was hard to guess the thoughts of the Meng family of Cangzhou, and he had never studied them. Qing Jing said confidently, "I'm afraid they have ulterior motives. They allied with us because they were worried that we would help Lu Shi. In fact, he even hopes to use our military strength to restrain Lu Shi's main force. If that's the case, the Meng family is not a match for us." Huang Song was stunned. What does this have to do with Lanting? The Meng clan wants to destroy Lu Shi, Feng Ju reminded him. If the Mengs wanted to destroy Jiang Pengji, when would be the best time? Of course, it was when the war between her and the northern borderline was at a stalemate and she didn't have the spare energy to watch over the rear. Huang Song frowned and said angrily, "How dare the Meng family do this? Wouldn't I become a traitor who betrayed the righteousness of the nation?" Qing Jing said coldly, "The Mengs secretly sold Mares to the northern borderline. He even did such a thing. Why would he be afraid of being charged?" Huang Song thought about it, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If that's the case, there's no need to consider forming an alliance with the Meng family. He had a premonition that his friendship with Jiang Pengji wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, they would have to fight each other. War was war, and righteousness was righteousness. He would never help a tyrant do evil. Feng Ju smiled. "Although we can't ally with the Meng family, we can ally with Lu Shi and fight them together." Huang Song said with a bitter face, "Lanting can't even take care of herself. Just the northern borderline is enough to make her anxious." Qing Jing said confidently, "Jing and Huijia mean that we will help Lu Shi delay the Mengs. Once she has settled the northern borderline, we will destroy the Mengs." Huang Song was speechless. Why did the two strategists say that his friends who spent their days drinking and having fun with him were so awesome? That was the northern borderline, not cabbages. How could they be chopped at will? Feng Ju smiled bitterly. He took out a secret report from his sleeve and handed it to Huang Song. "Your Highness, you'll understand once you read it." Huang Song took it and read it. His eyes widened. What did he see? The situation in the northern borderline was actually this chaotic? The imperial court was divided, and the princes who had escaped went to develop their own tribes, while the princes who had yet to leave fought with each other until they were cross-eyed. It was taboo to split up within a force, not to mention a nomadic tribe like the three tribes of the northern borderline. The regime of the northern borderline used the imperial court as a link to connect the forces of the various tribes, twisting countless ropes into one. Only then did they gather a terrifying combat power. If all the tribes were divided, their combat power would be greatly reduced. This is an unlucky year for the northern borderline. First came the horse plague, then came the civil strife. How could they fight against Lu Shi, who had been preparing for years? Although the combat power of the northern borderline cavalry was off the charts, the combat power of the elite infantry might not be able to defeat the disorganized cavalry. Qing Jing said confidently, "It's not an unlucky year. Someone must be secretly obstructing us. As for who the person is, it's obvious." Huang Song was so shocked that he bit his tongue. The civil strife in the northern borderline is the result of someone's scheme? Qing Jing nodded. As for who the person who stirred up trouble in the northern borderline was, he had not yet caught him. It was no wonder that Qing Jing could not catch him. Sun Wen had been a slave when he entered the northern borderline. Later, he became Herenchia's secret confidant and would not appear in front of others easily. When he gave advice to the 4th and 9th princes, he was also very careful. Who could suspect him? Some people in the northern borderline also realized that there was something wrong with the atmosphere recently, but Sun Wen was too cautious. They could not catch him by the tail. Huang Song sighed. If there's really someone, it must be someone from Lanting. The person who benefited the most from tormenting the northern borderline at this critical juncture was Jiang Pengji. I'm also relieved to ally with Lanting. Compared to the Mengs, Jiang Pengji made Huang Song feel more at ease. Although Jiang Pengji was a little deceitful, she was also a person who paid attention to morality. She would not casually stab her allies in the back. Even if she did, she would inform them before doing so. Sigh. I can finally answer to Madam. After talking about business, Huang Song heaved a long sigh of relief. He could not help but complain to his strategist. This woman is really not to be provoked. After this incident, even if Huang Song was given 10 times the courage, he would not dare to mention the word "take in a concubine." He added, especially a woman who knows martial arts. Feng Zhu could not help but laugh. He said, "My lord, you should go back and comfort the first madam." The grape trellis at home had collapsed. Why didn't he quickly help it up? Huang Song walked briskly to coax his wife. He threw out all kinds of sweet nothings and begged his wife for mercy while holding the 2 children. Only then did Madame Qi's heart recover and her anger turned into joy again. On the other side, the 2 strategists were also surprised by their mistress's temper. Feng Zhu turned his head and said to his wife, "My lord has taken in a concubine, and your mansion is about to be overturned." This wife was not chosen by the Fangs. It was Huang Song's wife who acted as his matchmaker. After their marriage, the 2 of them got along well. Chaolan's temper has always been so unyielding. It's not surprising. Lady Feng Zhu's appearance was not outstanding, but her temperament was extremely gentle. She could be said to be synonymous with gentleness and virtuousness. Fortunately, there is Lu Shi. Without him, I'm afraid the Lord will be laughed at. For a man, henpecked was not a good reputation. Even without this person, Chaolan will still make trouble. In the end, it will most likely be a peaceful separation. Too many men used ambition as an excuse to let women down. Some women would endure it, and some would rather die than live in dishonor. Qi Chaolan was the latter. It was not that she was stupid. On the contrary, Lady Qi was too smart. If you took in a concubine once, there would be a second time. Every time you took in a concubine, you would make trouble and compromise. Sooner or later, the sweetness between husband and wife would be worn away, and they would eventually become bitter couples. She would not give Huang Song a second chance to let her down. If Huang Song dared to take in a concubine, she would definitely separate if she said she would. If she separated, Huang Song would think about it for the rest of his life, and it would eventually become an obsession. She would always have a place in his heart. She let the beauties go back and forth around Huang Song, and no one could replace her. Feng Zhu held her hand and joked with a smile, "Madam, do you know Madam so well? What if I also want to take in a concubine?" Lady Feng Zhu glared at him, slowly pulled out her hand, and crushed the teacup on the table with a faint smile. "Husband, give it a try." Chapter 961. The alliance between the Lu, Su, and Huang families not only made the feudal lords and forces in Dongqing uneasy, but the northern borderline was also in turmoil. Other than external factors, the internal affairs of the northern borderline were also full of hidden dangers. First, the 9 princes of the northern borderline plotted against each other, then the king of the northern borderline's health deteriorated, like a river declining day by day. Cough, 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 come, bring my medicine over. Frequent consumption of hanshi powder, in addition to frequent outbursts of anger, almost drained the king of the northern borderline's body. How was he still the majestic king now? He was clearly a dying male lion, weak and frail. His sharp teeth could not even bite through the skin of his prey. How could the king of the northern borderline accept such a situation? The more it was so, the more he relied on the state he was in after consuming hanshi powder. His mind was clear and his body was full of energy, as if he had returned to his strongest and youngest days. He shouted for a few times, only after a while did his beloved concubine enter the room. What happened outside? Why did you come so late?" Ever since he consumed hanshi powder, the king of the northern borderline's temper became more irritable, he would vent his anger by killing the slaves when he was unhappy. He raised his hand and waved the tray, fiercely pinching his beloved concubine's wrist. His eyes were wide open, his heavy breathing came out from his nostrils onto his beloved concubine's face. "Spare me, my king! Spare me, my king!" The beloved concubine begged pitifully. "Tell me." The king of the northern borderline held on for a while. He laid back down exhausted, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Tell me." The beloved concubine seemed to be used to the king's violent temper. She knelt on the ground to clean up the remains and changed a new set of medicine. After consuming large amounts of hanshi powder, the king of the northern borderline was immersed in a wonderful state. A carefree yet sly smile appeared on his face. The beloved concubine at the side saw the situation. She only shivered, as if she fell into an ice cellar. She watched for a while, until the king's chest calmed down, then she carried the tray and retreated. The moment she left the main tent, her waist was suddenly tightened. Before she could scream, her mouth was covered by someone. The beloved concubine blushed. Ninth Highness. Not here." The king of the northern borderline's beloved concubine reminded him. "Ninth Highness, do you still remember the sixth prince?" The king of northern borderline's favorite concubine reminded him. "Your Highness, do you still remember the sixth prince?" When the ninth prince heard about the sixth prince, he immediately lost interest and pushed the woman away with an ashen face. It's really unlucky to mention sixth brother at this time. The sixth prince thought that the king of the northern borderline was seriously ill and the throne would fall on his head. So he held the king's beloved concubine and did whatever he wanted in front of the bed. He didn't expect that the king of the northern borderline would wake up at this time and fiercely attack the sixth prince, almost killing him. Learn from the mistakes of others and learn from the mistakes of others. The ninth prince could not fall into the same trap. It's better to be safe than sorry. We still have a long way to go. There's no need to rush. Compared to the ninth prince, who was willful and outstanding, this concubine was much calmer and saw things more clearly. There's no need to be so careful. Now, apart from number 4, who else can threaten me? The ninth prince sneered as a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Fourth sister, do you really think that Sun Wen is doing his best to help you? He and Herentia are both my people. He's just using you as a target to sweep away the enemies on the surface. The concubine said, "Aren't there still the third prince and the fifth prince?" The ninth prince sneered and said disdainfully, "The two of them? Although they share the same mother, they don't get along and have been fighting ever since they were young." The third prince was also unlucky. This person studied under Wu Liba. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be in such a miserable state. Unfortunately, he had a traitorous younger brother, the fifth prince. The death of Zhang dragged the third prince down and his reputation in the court plummeted. In order to prevent losses, the third prince could only lay low and plan for the future. However, the fifth prince was unwilling. He caught the other and bit him, treating his brother from the same mother as if he was his father's murderer. The two brothers fought so fiercely. Sun Wen even pushed them from behind and easily knocked them out of the game. Now, of the 9 sons of the northern borderline, only the fourth prince, whom Sun Wen assisted on the surface, and the 9th prince, whom he secretly supported, were left. "Thank you for your plan, sir." The fourth prince had been very successful recently and gave all kinds of rare treasures to Sun Wen. He and the 9th prince shared the same mother, but the 9th prince had never been adopted by the queen. He was only the son of a female slave and had a very lowly bloodline. In the fourth prince's eyes, the 9th prince was not a threat. The throne of the northern borderline was already in his hands. Sun Wen smiled and said, "The fourth prince is favored by the heavens. I'm just following the will of the heavens." These words made the fourth prince's body and mind feel good. He said, "When I ascend the throne, I hope that you will continue to assist me to unify the northern borderline and fight against the traitor Lu." Ascending the throne didn't mean that he could rest easy. His other brothers had all returned to their respective tribes and were all great troubles for him. Sun Wen smiled and said, "That's natural. I will definitely sacrifice my life for the fourth prince." The fourth prince was overjoyed at his loyalty. He held Sun Wen's hand and refused to let go. Sun Wen's schemes were unparalleled. If he could wholeheartedly assist him, he wouldn't be afraid of his brothers, let alone the covetous Lu Shi. As long as the ninth prince was eliminated, he would be the next king of the northern borderline. Sun Wen frowned and warned, "The fourth prince can't let his guard down. Although the ninth prince is not as good as the fourth prince, he is still the youngest, and the king loves him the most. The ninth prince usually hides behind others and lets others take the blame for everything. I don't know how many connections he has secretly accumulated. The fourth prince should be more cautious in case he takes the opportunity to force the king to abdicate and act first." The fourth prince's expression turned serious and he said seriously, "Thanks to your advice, I almost got carried away." The ninth prince was usually quiet, but he was the youngest son and was loved by the king of the northern borderline. All the good things were given to him. After so many years, who knew what trump cards the ninth prince had? A few days later, the fourth prince received a secret report from an informant. The ninth prince was gathering troops to force the king to abdicate. There were only 2 princes left in the imperial court. The ninth prince must have felt the pressure and couldn't wait to act first. "Sir, what should we do? The ninth prince is really going to force the king to abdicate. According to the king of the northern borderline's love for the ninth prince, he might really hand over the throne to him." Sun Wen comforted him, "The fourth prince is not in a hurry." "Why not?" The fourth prince said eagerly, "My plan has removed all the obstacles." "Do you think it will be all for the ninth prince?" Sun Wen said with a smile, "The fourth prince is not in a hurry. This is a ready-made weakness." As soon as he said this, the fourth prince was immediately comforted. "Sir, you are right." The fourth prince came back to his senses, his heart beating wildly. The ninth prince really made a bad move. The ninth prince couldn't bear the pressure and brought troops to force the king to abdicate. This was a stupid move made when there was no other way out. If he won the bet, the king of the northern borderline's position would fall to the ninth prince. If he lost, the fourth prince would be the final winner. Sun Wen suddenly frowned and asked, "The fourth prince, is this news true?" The fourth prince said, "Of course it's true. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.